She had exactly 7 days to marry a stranger, or watch her mother die in a house seized by creditors. Lila Hart had dreamed of railroad tickets and city lights, of choosing her own life. Instead, she stood in a freezing Colorado cabin staring at a dust-worn cowboy who'd ridden out of nowhere with enough money to save everything, and a proposal that made no sense. What kind of man pays a fortune for a bride he's never met? The answer would shatter every truth she thought she knew. But first, she had to survive saying yes. Welcome to my channel. If this story touches your heart, please follow along until the very end, hit that like button, and comment which city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. The wind came down from the high peaks like a living thing that night, howling through the gaps in the cabin walls, carrying ice crystals that stung exposed skin and made the single oil lamp flicker in its desperate battle against the dark. Lila Hart stood at the frost-covered window, her breath creating small clouds that vanished almost as quickly as they formed, watching the snow pile higher against the fence posts her father had set 15 years ago, back when hope still lived in this valley. Behind her, in the small bedroom that had once belonged to her parents together, her mother coughed, a wet, rattling sound that had become the constant rhythm of their lives over the past 8 months. Each cough was a clock tick, counting down towards something Lila refused to name even in the privacy of her own thoughts. Lila. Her younger brother Thomas appeared in the doorway, his 14-year-old frame too thin beneath the patched wool sweater that had been their father's. Doc Mercer's bill came today, and another letter from the bank. She didn't turn from the window. Put them with the others. There's no room left in the drawer. The laugh that escaped her held no humor. Then start a new pile. Thomas hesitated, and Lila could feel his eyes on her back, could sense the question he'd been building toward for weeks now. He was too young to carry the weight she saw settling on his shoulders, too young to understand that some questions had answers nobody wanted to hear. "Lila, what are we going to—" "Go sit with Mama," she said, softer now. "Read to her. She likes when you read." After he retreated, Lila pressed her forehead against the cold glass and let the chill seep into her skin. The sensation was almost welcome, something physical to focus on instead of the numbers that ran through her head in an endless mocking parade. $412 owed to the bank, $73 to Doc Mercer, $28 to Morrison's General Store, $16 to the livery, the funeral costs for her father, still unpaid 8 months later, and her mother's medicine, $8 a month, every month, for as long as— Lila squeezed her eyes shut. The numbers didn't lie. They never lied. And they all pointed to the same terrible truth. By spring, they would lose everything. The cabin her father had built with his own hands. The 30 acres of Rocky Mountain land he'd spent his life trying to make productive. The 2 remaining cows, the handful of chickens, the old plow horse too stubborn to die. And her mother. No. She would not let herself finish that thought. A sound cut through the wind's howl. Lila's eyes snapped open, her body going rigid. Hoofbeats, heavy and deliberate, coming up the frozen track that passed for a road. Nobody rode these mountains in weather like this. Nobody with any sense. She moved quickly to the corner where her father's rifle stood, checking the load with practiced hands. The weapon felt too heavy, too large, but she'd learned to shoot it well enough after he passed. Well enough to defend what was left. The hoofbeats stopped outside. Lila positioned herself beside the door, rifle raised, heart hammering against her ribs. Through the thin walls, she heard the creak of leather, the soft stamp of a horse's hooves, and then, unexpectedly, a voice. "I'm not here to cause trouble." The words came low and calm, barely audible over the wind. A man's voice, rough-edged but somehow patient, as if he had all the time in the world to stand in a blizzard and announce his peaceful intentions. "State your business," Lila called back, her voice steadier than she felt. A pause. "My name is Rowan Winters. I knew your father." She felt something shift in her chest, not quite hope, but not quite fear either. Her father had known many men, most of them hard-working folks who'd helped each other survive the brutal mountain seasons. But she didn't recognize this name. "My father's dead." "I know. I'm sorry for it." Another pause, longer this time. The wind screamed around the cabin's corners, and Lila imagined this stranger standing out there in the dark, ice forming on his hat brim, frost climbing his collar. Smart men didn't stand in blizzards. Desperate men did sometimes, and dangerous ones. "I have a proposition," the voice continued, "one that might benefit your family. I'll explain everything, but I'd rather not do it through the door while my horse freezes." Lila's finger rested on the trigger guard. Every instinct her father had taught her said to send this stranger away, to trust no one, to protect what was hers. But another voice, smaller, more desperate, whispered that she was running out of options, running out of time, running out of everything except prayers that seemed to go unanswered. She opened the door. The man who stepped into the lamplight looked exactly like what he'd claimed to be. A cowboy from the high country, shaped by long rides and hard seasons. His clothes were worn but well made. His boots caked with the kind of dust that only accumulated over hundreds of miles. A hat pulled low shadowed his face, but she could see enough. Strong jaw, weathered skin, eyes the color of winter sage. He wasn't handsome. Not in the way the men in her dog-eared romance novels were handsome, all sharp cheekbones and smoldering gazes. This man's face looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the mountains, all hard angles and quiet endurance. But it was his eyes that caught her, calm and steady, holding neither threat nor judgment, just patience, infinite patience, like he'd spent years learning to wait. "Thank you," he said, and even those two simple words carried weight, as if gratitude was something he didn't offer lightly. "Don't thank me yet." Lila kept the rifle pointed at the floor, but didn't set it aside. "Talk fast. My finger's cold and this trigger's sensitive." Something that might have been a smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. "Fair enough." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair pressed flat against his skull, slightly gray at the temples. Older than she'd first thought. Perhaps 35, perhaps 40. Hard to tell with men who lived rough. The mountains aged them differently than towns did. "I'll start with what I know," he said, "so you can judge whether to trust the rest. Your father was Samuel Hart, good man, honest man, worked himself half to death trying to make this land produce. He died in a rock slide last spring, up near Cooper's Ridge. Your mother took sick shortly after. The doctor calls it consumption, though he can't say for certain. Your brother Thomas is 14, good with horses, tries to do a man's work even though he's still growing into his shoulders. And you..." His eyes met hers directly. "You've been holding this family together with nothing but will and stubbornness for 8 months, and you're about 3 weeks away from losing everything." Lila's chest tightened. "You seem to know a lot about my family's business. I asked around before coming here." "Why?" Rowan was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the small fire struggling in the hearth, the patched quilts on the furniture, the empty spaces on the walls where anything of value had already been sold. "I need a wife," he said finally, "and I thought you might need a solution." The words landed in the silence like stones dropped into still water. Lila felt them ripple outward through her body, shock first, then anger, then something she refused to identify as hope. "A wife?" "Yes." "And you rode through a blizzard to propose to a woman you've never met." "I've met plenty of women." His voice remained steady, almost gentle. "Never found one I wanted to marry. Then I heard about you. A woman educated enough to read legal documents, stubborn enough to fight a losing battle, loyal enough to sacrifice everything for her family. Those aren't common qualities. You don't know anything about me. I know you haven't eaten a full meal in weeks because you've been giving your portions to your mother and brother. I know you sold your grandmother's ring last month to pay for medicine. I know you've written to every relative you have asking for help, and not one of them has written back." He paused. "And I know you've been considering answering Jacob Morrison's proposal, even though the thought of marrying him makes you want to scream." Lila's blood went cold. Jacob Morrison, the owner of the general store, a man 3 decades her senior with tobacco-stained teeth and hands that lingered too long on women's waists. He'd made his offer last week, right there in his shop, surrounded by the goods she could no longer afford. "Become my wife, and I'll forget your family's debt. Simple as that." She'd told no one about that conversation, not even Thomas. How? Morrison likes to brag when he's drinking. Half the town knows. The other half will know by week's end. The rifle trembled in her hands. She wanted to hate this stranger, wanted to throw him out into the storm and slam the door on his knowing eyes and his impossible proposition. But hatred required energy she no longer possessed. "Say I'm listening," she managed. "What exactly are you offering?" "I'll clear all your family's debts, the bank, the doctor, the store, everything. I'll provide enough supplies to get them through winter and spring, plus money to hire help with the spring planting. I'll sign over a sum to ensure your mother gets the medicine she needs for as long as she needs it." The numbers spun through Lila's head. That was hundreds of dollars, possibly thousands. No simple cowboy had that kind of money. And in return, you marry me, freely, by your own choice. Not because you have no other options, but because you've weighed them all and decided this is the one you want. Lila laughed, a harsh sound that scraped her throat. How generous! A choice that isn't really a choice at all. Every choice is constrained by circumstance. I'm just trying to make your constraints less brutal. He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of him, leather and pine smoke, and something else. Something that spoke of long journeys and high peaks. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not asking you to share my bed until you want to. I'm asking for a partnership, a legal bond, a chance to build something together. Why? Why me? Why any of this? For the first time, something flickered behind his calm exterior, a shadow of old pain quickly suppressed. Because I've spent 10 years looking for someone real. Someone who hasn't been corrupted by money or position or the games people play in fancy drawing rooms. Someone who knows what it means to struggle, to sacrifice, to hold on to hope, when everything says hope is foolish. He held her gaze. Maybe I'm wrong about you. Maybe you'll take my money, marry me, and spend the rest of your life resenting every moment. But I had to come. I had to ask. I had to know. The fire popped and crackled. Somewhere in the back room, Thomas was reading to their mother, his young voice rising and falling in the cadence of familiar stories. Outside, the storm raged on, indifferent to the impossible conversation unfolding in this tiny cabin. Lila lowered the rifle. "I need time," she said. "To think." Rowan nodded slowly. "I'll be staying at the boarding house in Miller's Crossing. You have until Friday to decide. After that, I'll assume you've chosen another path, and I'll ride on. Friday, that's 7 days. 7 days to choose the rest of your life." He picked up his hat, turning it in his hands. "I know it's not enough time. It's also more than some people ever get." He moved toward the door, and Lila found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "Wait." He paused, one hand on the latch. "How do I know you're not lying? How do I know you actually have the money you're promising?" Rowan reached into his coat and withdrew a leather pouch, setting it on the table near the door. "That's $50, a gesture of good faith. Use it for your mother's medicine, for food, for whatever you need. If you decide not to marry me, keep it anyway. Consider it a gift from a man who admired your father." He opened the door, and the wind rushed in, bringing ice and darkness and the smell of the wild mountains. "Rowan Winters," she said, testing the name. He looked back at her, and in the lamp's flickering light, she thought she saw something like hope in his weathered face. "Lila Hart," he replied. "I'll be waiting." Then he was gone, swallowed by the storm, leaving only the leather pouch and the impossible weight of a choice that would change everything. The next morning dawned clear and bitter cold, the kind of mountain morning where the air itself seemed frozen solid and every breath felt like swallowing ice. Lila hadn't slept. She'd sat by the fire until it burned down to embers, then rebuilt it, then let it burn down again, all while the leather pouch sat on the table, unopened, radiating possibility like heat from a stove. "Lila?" Thomas stood in the doorway, his hair sticking up at wild angles, his eyes still fuzzy with sleep. "Was someone here last night? I thought I heard voices." She'd rehearsed this conversation in her head a dozen times. Now all the carefully chosen words scattered like startled birds. "Yes, a man named Rowan Winters. He knew Papa." Thomas's face brightened momentarily at the mention of their father, then clouded with suspicion. "What did he want?" "It's complicated, Thomas. I'm not a child anymore. No, she thought, looking at him. You're not, and you deserve the truth. He's offered to pay our debts, all of them. In exchange, She paused, steeling herself. In exchange for my hand in marriage. The silence that followed seemed to have physical weight, pressing down on them both. Thomas's expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally settled into something harder to read. You can't, he said. I haven't decided anything yet. You can't marry some stranger for money. That's not right. That's not what Papa would have wanted. Papa would have wanted us to survive. The words came out sharper than she intended. Papa would have wanted Mama to get her medicine. Papa would have wanted you to have a future beyond starving on a frozen mountain. Thomas's jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked so much like their father that Lila's heart seized. There has to be another way. If you find one, please tell me. I've been looking for 8 months. She watched him struggle with the unfairness of it all. The same unfairness she'd been wrestling with since the rock slide that took their father, since the cough that wouldn't leave their mother, since the day she realized that dreams of railroad tickets and city lights were luxuries for people who didn't have families dying in their arms. The money in that pouch, Thomas said slowly, nodding toward the table. Is it real? Lila walked over and opened the leather pouch for the first time. Inside, neatly folded, were 5 $10 bills, more money than she'd seen in one place in her entire life. Thomas sucked in a breath. $50. He said it was a gesture of good faith, ours to keep whether I marry him or not. Nobody gives away $50. He did. They stood together, staring at the bills as if they might disappear. $50. Enough to pay Doc Mercer and buy 3 months of medicine. Enough to settle the feed bill and get credit at the store again. Enough to buy time, but not enough to save them. Not in the long run. I need to go into town, Lila said. Talk to people. Find out what I can about this Rowan Winters. I'll come with you. No, stay with Mama. Make sure she eats something, even if she says she's not hungry. Thomas looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her face must have stopped him. He nodded once, sharply, and retreated to the back room. Lila dressed in her warmest clothes, her father's old coat over her own wool dress, a scarf wrapped 3 times around her neck, boots stuffed with dried grass for insulation. The walk to Miller's Crossing was 3 miles, manageable in good weather, treacherous after a storm. But the sky was clear, and the road would be packed hard by the cold. She needed answers, and she wasn't going to find them sitting by a fire, watching bills pile up and options disappear. Miller's Crossing wasn't much of a town. A single main street lined with wooden buildings, a church at one end, a saloon at the other, and various enterprises struggling for survival in between. Lila had walked these streets her whole life, knew every face, every name, every piece of gossip that passed through the general store and the post office. But today, the town felt different. People watched her pass with something new in their eyes. She caught whispers that cut off when she drew near, saw meaningful glances exchanged between neighbors who'd known her since she was a child. Morrison's proposal. The stranger's visit. In a town this small, there were no secrets, only varying degrees of public knowledge. Her first stop was the post office, where Widow Patterson ran the mail and collected information with equal efficiency. Lila Hart. The widow looked up from her sorting, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Cold morning for a walk. I'm looking for information about a man named Rowan Winters. He says he's staying at the boarding house. Widow Patterson's expression flickered, something between curiosity and concern. The tall one? Dark hair, quiet manner? Looks like he's spent more time with horses than people. That's him? He rode in 3 days ago, paid a week's board in advance, cash money, asked a lot of questions around town. About your family, mostly. Lila's stomach tightened. What kind of questions? The kind a man asks when he's interested in a woman, or her circumstances. The widow set down her stack of letters, giving Lila her full attention. He stopped in here, wanted to know about your father. Seemed genuinely grieved to hear about the rock slide. Said they'd done business together, years back, up near the Wyoming border. My father never mentioned him. Your father was a private man, kept his own counsel. Widow Patterson leaned forward slightly. What I can tell you, Lila, is that this Rowan Winters didn't strike me as a liar or a scoundrel. He struck me as a man carrying something heavy, looking for a place to set it down. That's not very specific. Specifics are for legal documents. Impressions are for life. The widow's voice softened. You're in trouble, child. Everyone knows it. And when a woman's in trouble, men come sniffing around. Some are wolves. Some are something else. You'll have to figure out for yourself which kind this one is. Lila thanked her and moved on, but the widow's words stayed with her, turning over in her mind like stones in a river. Her next stop was the saloon, not a place she normally frequented, but the best source of information about any stranger passing through. She slipped in through the back, where the cook, Mama Ruth, ran the kitchen and knew everything worth knowing. Lila Hart, Mama Ruth's dark face creased with welcome. You look half-frozen, girl. Sit down. Let me get you something hot. I can't stay long. Mama Ruth, have you seen the stranger, the cowboy who rode in a few days ago? Mama Ruth's hands paused over the pot she was stirring. Rowan Winters. Yes, I've seen him. He takes his meals here, quiet-like, tips well. Doesn't drink much, doesn't gamble, doesn't visit the working girls upstairs, just sits and watches and listens. Listens to what? Everything. Conversations at the bar, gossip between tables, arguments over cards. He's learning this town, Lila, studying it like a book. Why would a drifter care about learning Miller's Crossing? Mama Ruth's eyes met hers, knowing and kind. I don't think he's a drifter, child. I've seen drifters. They move through like tumbleweeds, leaving nothing behind. This man moves different, like someone who knows exactly where he's going, even if nobody else does. Lila opened her mouth to ask more, but the back door opened and one of the serving girls hurried in, bringing cold air and curious looks. The moment for private conversation had passed. Thank you, Lila said, pulling her scarf tighter. I should go. Lila. Mama Ruth caught her arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Whatever choice you're facing, make sure it's yours. Not your family's choice, not the town's choice. Yours. That's the only kind that won't poison you in the end. Her last stop was the boarding house itself. She hadn't planned to come here, had told herself she was just gathering information, keeping her options open, not making any decisions. But her feet carried her up the creaking porch steps anyway, through the front door with its cheerful bell, into the warm parlor where Mrs. Clemens rented rooms to respectable travelers. Miss Hart! Mrs. Clemens bustled over, her round face flushed with curiosity. What a surprise! Can I help you with something? I'm looking for one of your guests, Mr. Rowan Winters. If Mrs. Clemens was surprised, she hid it well. He's out at the moment, went to check on his horse at the livery. Should be back within the hour, if you'd like to wait. Lila shouldn't wait. She should go home, think carefully, weigh her options like the practical woman her father had raised. Instead, she heard herself say, I'll wait. Mrs. Clemens showed her to a small sitting room off the main parlor, brought her tea and biscuits, and left her alone with her thoughts. Lila sat by the window, watching the street, her tea growing cold in her hands. What was she doing here? What did she hope to learn that she didn't already know? The facts were simple. A stranger had offered to save her family in exchange for marriage. She could accept and give up her dreams of freedom, or she could refuse and watch everything she loved crumble to dust. Some choice. The door opened behind her and she knew before turning that it was him. Something about the way the air shifted, the way silence suddenly felt different. Miss Hart, Rowan's voice carried genuine surprise. I didn't expect to see you so soon. She turned to face him. In daylight, without the drama of the storm and the flickering lamplight, he looked more ordinary. Just a man in worn clothes with tired eyes and weathered hands. But there was something in the way he held himself, an alertness, a contained energy that spoke of depths she couldn't quite read. I have questions, she said, and I want honest answers. He nodded slowly, closing the door behind him and taking the chair across from hers. Ask. Where does your money come from? Cattle, mostly. Some land investments. I've been working since I was 15, saving since I was 20. I'm not rich, but I have enough to do what I promised. Why were you asking about my father? Samuel Hart was one of the few honest men I've met in a dishonest world. We crossed paths about 6 years ago, up near the Wyoming border. I was driving cattle, he was prospecting. We shared a camp for a few days, talked about life and land and what makes a man worth knowing. I never forgot him. And when you heard he'd died? A shadow crossed Rowan's face. I came to pay my respects. Found out about your mother's illness, your family's debts. Found out about you, a woman holding everything together through sheer force of will. He paused. And I found out about Morrison's proposal. Lila's jaw tightened. That's not why I'm here. I know, you're here because you want to believe there's a third option, one where you don't have to marry anyone, where you can save your family on your own terms. His voice was gentle, but firm. I wish I could offer you that, but I can only offer what I have, myself, my resources, my word that I'll treat you with respect and give you as much freedom as marriage allows. Why marriage at all? Why not just loan me the money? Because a loan creates debt, and debt creates obligation. I don't want you obligated to me. I want you standing beside me as an equal, a partner, someone who chose to be there. He leaned forward slightly. And because I'm tired, Miss Hart, tired of being alone, tired of wondering if every person who smiles at me sees money instead of a man. You looked at me last night like I was something strange and possibly dangerous, but not once did you look at me like a bag of coins. That's rarer than you know. Lila felt the honesty in his words like heat from a fire. But honesty wasn't enough, not when her whole life hung in the balance. I need to know more, she said, about where we'd live, what kind of life you're offering. I can't agree to spend my life with a man who's still mostly a mystery. Rowan was quiet for a moment, and she saw something shift behind his eyes, a decision being made, a door being opened. There's something I haven't told you, he said slowly. Something about who I am, where I come from. If you agree to marry me, you'll learn everything. But I need to know first that you're serious, that this isn't just curiosity. I'm considering spending my life with you. I think that qualifies as serious. Another almost smile. Fair point. He stood, moving to the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. Give me until Friday. Let me show you who I am instead of just telling you. Ride with me tomorrow, see the land I'm offering you, then decide. Every practical instinct told her this was a terrible idea, riding into the wilderness with a stranger, miles from help or witnesses. Her father would have forbidden it, but her father was gone, and the woman he'd raised, the stubborn, dreaming, desperate woman, knew that some answers couldn't be found in safe parlors and cautious conversations. Tomorrow, she agreed. First light, dot. That night, Lila sat by her mother's bed and told her everything. The visitor in the storm, the proposal, the money, the questions that remained unanswered. Her mother listened with eyes that were too bright against her pale face, her thin hand wrapped around Lila's fingers. He sounds like a ghost, Martha Hart whispered when Lila finished. A ghost who rode out of a storm with impossible promises. Maybe he is. Maybe this is all some elaborate trick. Or maybe, her mother paused, coughing softly. Maybe he's exactly what he seems. A lonely man looking for something real. How can you be so calm about this? I'm talking about marrying a stranger. Martha's grip tightened. I married a stranger once. Your father walked into my family's store in St. Louis looking for supplies, and by the end of the week, I knew I'd follow him anywhere. Everyone said I was foolish. My parents threatened to disown me. But I looked in his eyes and saw something that felt like home. This is different. Every love story is different. The question is always the same. Does your heart recognize something worth trusting? Lila thought about Rowan's eyes, calm, patient, carrying shadows she couldn't name. She thought about the way he'd stood in the storm, waiting for her to open the door, offering choice in a situation that felt choiceless. I don't know, she admitted. I don't know what I recognize. Her mother's hand lifted to touch her cheek, a gesture as familiar as breathing. Then ride with him tomorrow. Ask your questions, listen to his answers, and when you come back, trust whatever truth you found. Dawn came cold and clear. Lila dressed in her warmest clothes and found Rowan already waiting outside, holding the reins of 2 horses, his own dark gelding and a smaller bay mare with intelligent eyes. "She's gentle," he said, seeing Lila's hesitation. "I borrowed her from the livery. Thought you might not want to ride double." Lila mounted without comment, arranging her skirts as best she could. She hadn't ridden much since her father died. No time, no reason, no energy for anything beyond survival. But her body remembered the rhythm, and within minutes she'd found her balance. They rode in silence as the sun climbed over the eastern peaks, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose. Rowan led them away from town, following trails that Lila had never explored, climbing higher into country that felt wild and untouched. "Where are we going?" she asked finally. "Somewhere I want to show you. It's about a 4-hour ride. We'll be back well before dark." 4 hours. Alone in the wilderness with a man she barely knew. The smart thing would be to turn back, to insist on staying close to town, to maintain at least the appearance of propriety. Instead, she nudged her horse forward and followed him into the white expanse. As they rode, he began to talk, slowly at first, then more freely, as if the open space gave him permission to unburden himself. He told her about his childhood in the high country, learning to ride before he could walk, following his father on cattle drives that lasted months. He told her about the years he'd spent working other men's ranches, saving every penny, dreaming of land of his own. "I bought my first 100 acres when I was 22, he said. "Worst land in the valley," everyone said. "Rocky, steep, nothing but trees and trouble. But I saw something they didn't. I saw potential." "What kind of potential?" He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. "That's what I'm going to show you." They crested a ridge around midday, and Lila's breath caught in her throat. Before them lay a valley she'd never known existed, a hidden paradise cradled between mountain peaks, protected from the worst of the wind and weather. A river wound through its center, frozen now but clearly abundant in warmer months. Trees covered the slopes, thick and healthy, a fortune in timber if properly managed. And at the center of the valley, impossibly, stood a house. Not a cabin, not a rough shelter. A house, large and solid and built with obvious care, smoke curling from multiple chimneys, windows gleaming in the winter sun. It looked like something from another world, a mansion transplanted from some eastern city into the heart of the Colorado wilderness. "What?" Lila couldn't finish the question, couldn't find words for what she was seeing. "This is what I wanted to show you," Rowan said quietly. "This is who I really am." And in that moment, everything Lila thought she understood about the quiet cowboy from the high country shattered into 1,000 pieces, leaving only questions, and a choice that had suddenly become far more complicated than she'd ever imagined. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and snow and something like destiny. Lila stared at the impossible mansion in the hidden valley, her heart racing, her mind spinning. 7 days to choose the rest of her life. And now she understood. She hadn't even begun to know what she was choosing. The mansion rose from the valley floor like something conjured from a fever dream, its stone walls and timber frame defying everything Lila thought she knew about the man beside her. She sat frozen in her saddle, the cold forgotten, her mind struggling to reconcile the dust-worn cowboy with the impossible wealth sprawled before her. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Rowan didn't answer immediately. He sat watching her reaction, his expression unreadable, as if her response to this revelation mattered more than anything else in the world. "The valley has been in my family for 3 generations, he said finally. "My grandfather discovered it in 1820, when he was running from something he never spoke about. He built the first cabin right where the main house stands now. My father expanded it, and I—" He paused, something flickering behind his eyes. "I finished what they started." "But you told me you were a cowboy. You said you'd been saving money, working ranches. All true. I did work ranches. I did save money. I just didn't tell you about everything else." He turned his horse toward the valley, gesturing for her to follow. "Come. I'll explain inside. You deserve the full truth before you make any decision." They descended the ridge in silence, following a trail that wound through the trees with careful precision. As they drew closer, Lila began to notice details she'd missed from above. Outbuildings scattered around the main house, smoke rising from what appeared to be a bunkhouse, cattle grazing in a protected meadow despite the snow. This wasn't just a house. It was a working operation, larger and more prosperous than anything she'd seen in this part of Colorado. A man emerged from the stable as they approached, his weathered face breaking into a grin when he saw Rowan. "Boss, wasn't expecting you back so soon." His eyes shifted to Lila with obvious curiosity. "And with company, I see." "Ben, this is Miss Lila Hart. She'll be staying for supper. Please see to the horses and let Mrs. Prescott know we'll need an extra place set." The man called Ben nodded, taking both sets of reins with the easy competence of someone who'd done this task 1,000 times. Lila dismounted, her legs stiff from the long ride, her mind still reeling from the impossible situation she'd ridden into. The front door of the mansion opened before they reached it, and a woman appeared, tall and severe, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, and eyes that assessed Lila with unsettling precision. "Mr. Winters?" Her voice was cool, formal. "I wasn't informed we would have guests." "It was a last-minute decision, Mrs. Prescott. This is Miss Lila Hart. She's considering my proposal of marriage." If the housekeeper was surprised, she gave no sign. Her expression remained perfectly neutral as she stepped aside to let them enter. "I'll have tea brought to the library, and I'll inform Cook about the additional place setting." The interior of the house stole what remained of Lila's breath. She'd expected rough elegance, perhaps, the kind of comfort a wealthy rancher might accumulate over years. What she found instead was sophistication that belonged in Denver or San Francisco, not a hidden valley in the Colorado mountains. Crystal chandeliers caught the afternoon light. Oriental rugs covered polished hardwood floors. Paintings hung on the walls, real paintings, not the cheap prints sold in frontier general stores. "You're not just wealthy," Lila said slowly, the pieces finally clicking into place. "You're rich, truly rich, the kind of rich that builds mansions in hidden valleys and employs housekeepers who talk like they came from finishing schools." Rowan led her into a library lined with books from floor to ceiling, a fire already burning in the massive stone fireplace. He gestured to a leather chair near the warmth and took the one across from her, his posture suddenly weary, as if the act of revealing this place had cost him something. "My grandfather made his fortune in timber," he said, "not just cutting trees, but owning the land they grew on. By the time my father inherited, the Winters name controlled more forest land than most people could imagine. Mills, contracts, shipping rights, everything that touches timber in this part of the country has passed through our hands at some point." The Winters name. Lila's mind raced through half-remembered conversations, newspaper articles glimpsed in passing, gossip overheard in town. Winters Timber Company. That's one of the biggest operations between here and San Francisco. The biggest, actually, as of 3 years ago. She stared at him, seeing him anew. Not the quiet cowboy who'd appeared at her door, but the heir to an empire. A man who could buy and sell Miller's Crossing 100 times over without noticing the expense. "Why?" The question burst out of her. "Why all of this? The disguise, the pretense? Riding into my family's cabin like some wandering stranger? You could have sent lawyers, agents, anyone. Why come yourself looking like—" She gestured at his worn clothes, his dusty boots. "Like this?" Rowan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried an old exhaustion, the weariness of someone who'd been carrying a heavy load for far too long. Because everyone wants something from Rowan Winters, heir to the timber empire. Every smile hides calculation. Every friendship comes with expectations. Every woman who's ever shown interest has been more interested in the fortune than the man. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I've been hunted, Lila. That's the only word for it. Hunted by fortune seekers and business rivals and people who see me as nothing more than a path to wealth. I came to your door as a cowboy because I needed to know, for once in my life, what it felt like to be wanted for myself alone. But I didn't want you at all. I pointed a rifle at your chest." Something like a smile flickered across his face. "That's exactly what I mean. You saw a stranger at your door during a storm, and your first instinct was to protect your family. Not to calculate what you could gain from me, not to flutter and flatter and scheme. You just stood your ground." Mrs. Prescott appeared with a silver tea service, setting it on the table between them with practiced efficiency. She poured 2 cups without asking and withdrew silently, closing the library doors behind her. Lila wrapped her hands around the warm porcelain, needing something to anchor her in a world that had shifted so dramatically in the space of an afternoon. "Your proposal," she said slowly. "Clearing my family's debts, providing for my mother's care. That's pocket change to you, isn't it? Less than pocket change. The amount doesn't matter. What matters is that you needed help, and I was able to offer it." "But you could help 100 families, 1,000. Why mine? Why me?" Rowan set down his tea, his gaze never leaving her face. "Because your father was the first man who ever treated me like a person instead of a bank account. When we met, I was traveling under a false name, trying to disappear for a few months. He could have recognized me. My face has appeared in enough newspapers. But if he did, he never let on. He just shared his fire, his food, his conversation. He talked about his family like they were the greatest treasure in the world. His wife, who made him laugh. His son, who would be a fine man someday. His daughter, who read every book she could find and dreamed of seeing the world." Lila's throat tightened. She could hear her father's voice in those words, could imagine him sitting by a campfire, speaking of them with the quiet pride he'd always carried. "He told you about me. He told me you were special, different. He said you had a mind that wouldn't stay caged and a heart that couldn't help loving even when it hurt. He said he worried about what would happen to you stuck in a small mountain town with no opportunities to match your abilities." Rowan's voice softened. "When I heard he'd died, I felt like I'd lost something I hadn't even known I was holding on to. And when I learned about your family's troubles, your mother's illness, the creditors circling, I knew I had to come. Not just for Samuel's memory, but because everything he'd told me suggested you might be the person I'd been looking for all along. A person who didn't know who you really were. A person who could see me without the money getting in the way." Lila rose from her chair, moving to the window. The valley stretched out before her, white and pristine, a secret world hidden from everything she'd ever known. She could see men working in the distance, small figures against the snow, going about the business of running an empire she hadn't known existed. "What happens now?" she asked without turning. "Now that I know the truth?" "That's entirely up to you." Rowan's voice came from directly behind her, closer than she'd expected. "If you want to leave, I'll have someone escort you home safely. The money I gave your family is yours to keep regardless. I'll find another way to help them, if you'll allow it. And if I stay? If you stay, I'll answer every question you have. I'll show you every corner of this valley, every ledger and contract in secret. I'll give you time to decide whether you can build a life with me, not because you need to be saved, but because you choose to." She turned to face him, and the nearness of him caught her off guard. He stood less than an arm's length away, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're asking me to trust you," she said. "A man who lied about who he was from the moment we met. I'm asking you to understand why I lied, and to give me the chance to be honest from this moment forward." He didn't reach for her, didn't try to close the distance between them, just stood there, waiting, offering her the choice he'd promised. "I'm not a saint, Lila. I've done things I'm not proud of, made decisions that seemed right at the time but left scars I can't undo. But I've never lied about what matters. I want a partner, not a possession. I want someone who'll challenge me, argue with me, tell me when I'm wrong. I want a marriage that means something. Why would a man with everything want marriage at all? You could have any woman in Colorado, in the whole country, throwing herself at your feet." "I don't want a woman throwing herself at my feet. I want one standing at my side." He paused. "And I'm 38 years old, Lila. I've spent 2 decades building this empire, and I've done it alone. The wealth means nothing if there's no one to share it with. The land is just dirt without a family to leave it to. I'm tired of being alone, tired of wondering if every person who smiles at me sees money instead of a man." The raw honesty in his voice cut through her defenses. She'd expected calculation, manipulation, the tools of a man used to getting what he wanted. Instead, she found something that looked almost like vulnerability. "I need time," she said, "to think, to understand what you're really offering. Take all the time you need. The guest room is yours for as long as you want it. Mrs. Prescott will see to anything you require." And if I decide to leave, then I'll respect your decision and never bother you again. His voice carried no threat, no pressure, only acceptance. But Lila, whatever you decide, promise me you'll decide for yourself. Not for your family, not for your mother's medicine, not because you're out of options. Decide because it's what you want. That's all I ask. She wanted to argue that it wasn't that simple, that decisions couldn't be separated from circumstances, that wanting was a luxury she'd never been able to afford. But the words died in her throat, replaced by something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Dangerous, foolish, impossible hope. "Show me the rest," she said. "Show me everything." And for the first time since she'd ridden into this hidden valley, Rowan Winters smiled. The tour took the rest of the afternoon and left Lila's head spinning with information she could barely process. The main house alone contained 12 bedrooms, a ballroom that hadn't been used in years, a kitchen large enough to feed an army, and a conservatory filled with plants that had no business surviving a Colorado winter. But it was the outbuildings that truly revealed the scope of Rowan's empire. The timber mill sat at the far end of the valley, silent now in the winter months, but clearly massive in scale. "We process most of our lumber here," Rowan explained, leading her through the empty building. "The rest goes to facilities closer to the railroad, but this is where the careful work happens. Custom cuts, specialty orders, anything that requires more skill than speed." They visited the stables, where a dozen horses stood in clean stalls, and the bunkhouse, where a handful of year-round workers nodded respectfully as they passed. Lila noticed how they looked at Rowan, not with fear or servility, but with something closer to genuine regard. "They don't call you sir," she observed as they walked back toward the main house. "I don't ask them to. Every man here earns his place through work, not titles. Most of them have been with me for years." He glanced at her. "Does that bother you? A wealthy man who doesn't demand deference? It surprises me." "Why? Because rich men are supposed to be tyrants?" "Because every rich man I've ever encountered has been exactly that." She thought of Jacob Morrison, the way he lorded his modest prosperity over everyone who owed him money, the way his eyes had traveled over her body when he'd made his proposal, as if she were another item on his shelf to be purchased. Wealth changes people. Usually not for the better. "Wealth reveals people," Rowan corrected. "It gives them the power to become whoever they truly are. Some become generous, others become monsters. The money doesn't decide. They do." They returned to the main house as the sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of orange and purple. Mrs. Prescott met them at the door with the news that dinner would be served in an hour, and Lila found herself ushered to a guest room larger than her family's entire cabin. A fire burned in the fireplace. A copper tub sat steaming in one corner, already filled with hot water. Clean clothes had been laid out on the bed, a simple dress, but finer than anything Lila had ever owned. "Mrs. Prescott took the liberty of finding something suitable," a young maid explained, appearing from nowhere. "She said your traveling clothes wouldn't be comfortable for dinner." Lila wanted to protest, wanted to maintain some grip on her independence, but the hot bath called to her like a siren song. She hadn't been truly warm in months. "Thank you," she managed. "I can manage myself." The maid curtsied and withdrew, leaving Lila alone with the impossible luxuries surrounding her. She undressed slowly, laying her worn clothes carefully over a chair, and stepped into the tub. The heat sank into her bones, releasing tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and for the first time since her father died, allowed herself to simply exist without planning, without worrying, without calculating the endless mathematics of survival. What would it be like to live like this? To never worry about medicine or debts or where the next meal would come from? The thought was almost too large to hold, too foreign to feel real. But beneath the fantasy lurked harder questions. Could she marry a man she barely knew, even if that man was offering her the world? Could she trust someone who'd begun their relationship with deception, however well-intentioned? And what would it mean for her dreams, her independence, her sense of self, to become the wife of one of the wealthiest men in Colorado? She had no answers. Only questions, multiplying like rabbits in the spring. Dinner was served in a dining room that could have seated 30, but held only 2. Rowan sat at one end of the long table, Lila at the other, with enough distance between them to feel almost absurd. The food was extraordinary: roast beef, fresh vegetables somehow procured in the dead of winter, bread still warm from the oven, but Lila barely tasted it. Her mind was too full. "Tell me about your life," she said finally, breaking a silence that had stretched too long. "Not the business, not the empire. Your life. What do you do when you're not managing a timber fortune?" Rowan set down his fork, considering the question. "I read, mostly history, some philosophy. I ride, sometimes for days, alone in the high country. I write letters to people I'll never meet, trying to understand how the world works." He paused. "I watch the stars on clear nights and wonder if there's anyone out there looking back." "That sounds lonely." "It is." No defensiveness in his voice, no self-pity, just simple acknowledgement. "I've tried to fill the emptiness with work, with acquisition, with building this valley into something permanent. But things don't substitute for people. I learned that too late." "Have you ever been in love?" The question surprised them both. Lila felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she didn't take it back. If she was considering spending her life with this man, she deserved to know. "Once," Rowan said quietly. "A long time ago. Her name was Elizabeth. She was the daughter of a business rival, beautiful, clever, everything I thought I wanted. I courted her for 2 years, convinced she loved me for myself." His jaw tightened. "I discovered the night before our wedding that she'd been feeding information to her father the entire time. Every business secret I'd shared, every vulnerability I'd revealed, all of it used against me." "What happened?" "I called off the wedding. Her father used what he'd learned to try to destroy my company. It took me 3 years to recover." He met Lila's eyes across the table. "That's why I came to your door in disguise. Why I needed to know you before you knew me. I couldn't survive another Elizabeth." The rawness of his confession stirred something in Lila's chest. Not pity, exactly, but recognition. She knew what it meant to be betrayed, to build walls around your heart because the alternative hurt too much. "I'm not her," she said. "I know. I knew from the moment you pointed that rifle at my chest." Something like warmth flickered in his eyes. Elizabeth would have smiled and calculated. "You just told me to talk fast." Despite everything, the confusion, the uncertainty, the impossibility of her situation, Lila found herself laughing. The sound surprised her, rusty from disuse, but real. Rowan's smile widened, transforming his weathered face. "That's the first time I've heard you laugh. It's been a while since I've had reason to." "Then I'll make it my mission to give you reasons. Every day, if you'll let me." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with promise and possibility. Lila felt herself standing at a crossroads, 2 paths stretching out before her into unknown territory. "I should return home tomorrow," she said. "My mother, my brother, they'll be worried." "Of course. I'll ride with you if you'll allow it." "And then?" "And then you take the time you need to decide. The offer stands, Lila. It will keep standing as long as you need it to." She nodded slowly, not trusting herself to say more. The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, the stars emerged one by one, scattered across a sky so vast it made human concerns feel impossibly small. Whatever she decided, nothing would ever be the same. The ride home the next morning felt different. The same mountains surrounded them, the same snow covered the ground, but Lila saw it all through new eyes, eyes that had glimpsed a hidden valley and a life beyond anything she'd imagined. Rowan rode beside her in comfortable silence, not pressing for conversation, not demanding answers she wasn't ready to give. His patience was remarkable, almost unsettling in its constancy. Most men she'd known were quick to push, to insist, to fill silence with words. This man seemed content to simply be. As they neared Miller's Crossing, Lila finally voiced the question that had been building all morning. "What happens if I say yes? Practically, I mean. Where would we live? What would be expected of me?" "We'd live in the valley, primarily. I have obligations that take me to Denver several times a year. Board meetings, social functions, the unavoidable machinery of business. You'd be welcome to join me or stay behind as you prefer." He guided his horse around a patch of ice. "As for expectations, I expect you to be yourself, to pursue whatever interests you, to have opinions and voice them. to be a partner in the truest sense. And children? The question felt impossibly intimate, but it had to be asked. She felt her cheeks warm even as she kept her eyes fixed on the trail ahead. I would want children, eventually. A family. But that would be your choice as much as mine, and it would happen when and if we both want it to. His voice remained steady, matter of fact. I'm not looking for a broodmare, Lila. I'm looking for a wife. They rode on, the town gradually coming into view, a cluster of buildings that suddenly seemed impossibly small against the scope of what she'd witnessed. Her whole life had been contained in these few square miles, but now she'd seen beyond. Now she knew what else existed in the world. Thomas was waiting on the porch when they arrived, his face tight with worry that dissolved into something more complicated when he saw Rowan. "You're the one who came during the storm," Thomas said, stepping forward. "The one with the money." "Thomas." Lila dismounted quickly, putting herself between her brother and the stranger. "This is Mr. Rowan Winters. He's been showing me, explaining. I know what he's been doing." Thomas's jaw was set in a way that reminded Lila painfully of their father. "The whole town knows. Jacob Morrison's been telling everyone you've run off with some rich cowboy." Lila felt the blood drain from her face. Morrison. Of course. The man who couldn't stand being refused would ensure everyone knew she'd chosen someone else. Rowan dismounted calmly, showing no reaction to the hostility in Thomas's voice. "I imagine Mr. Morrison is not pleased with recent developments. He's furious. Came by yesterday demanding to know where Lila had gone. Said he had a right to know since they had an understanding." "We had no understanding," Lila snapped. "He made an offer. I made no answer." "That's not what he's telling people." Thomas's eyes shifted between his sister and the stranger. "He's saying you led him on. That you took advantage of his generosity. That you're—" He stopped, clearly unwilling to repeat whatever ugly words Morrison had used. Lila felt her hands ball into fists. After everything she'd done for this family, after every sacrifice and struggle, to be painted as some kind of opportunistic schemer by a man she'd never encouraged. "May I speak with your mother?" Rowan's voice cut through her rising anger. "I believe proper introductions are in order." Thomas looked like he wanted to refuse, but Lila nodded. Whatever happened next, her mother deserved to meet the man who'd upended their world. They found Martha Hart propped up in bed, looking more alert than Lila had seen her in weeks. The medicine she'd been able to buy with Rowan's money was already making a difference. Color in her cheeks, strength in her voice, light in her eyes that had been dimming for months. "So you're the mysterious stranger," Martha said, studying Rowan with the same penetrating gaze Lila had inherited. "The one who rode through a blizzard with impossible promises." "Mrs. Hart," Rowan inclined his head respectfully. "I'm honored to meet you. Your husband spoke of you with great love." Something shifted in Martha's expression. "You knew Samuel?" "We shared a camp one summer, years ago. He was one of the finest men I've ever met." Rowan moved closer, lowering himself into the chair beside her bed with the ease of someone accustomed to sick rooms. "I was sorry to hear of his passing. Sorrier still that I couldn't come sooner to help." "Help." Martha's voice carried an edge Lila knew well, the protective sharpness of a mother guarding her young. "You've offered to marry my daughter, to solve all our problems with money that appears from nowhere." "Not from nowhere. From years of work and inheritance and good fortune I did nothing to deserve." Rowan met Martha's gaze steadily. "I won't pretend my motives are purely selfless. I want to marry Lila because I believe she's remarkable. Because I'm tired of being alone. Because I think we could build something meaningful together." "And what does Lila want?" The question hung in the air. Rowan turned to look at her, and Lila found herself caught between the two of them, her mother's protective love on one side, this stranger's impossible offer on the other. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "I need more time." Martha nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Rowan's face. "Then you'll have it. But know this, Mr. Winters, my daughter is worth more than any fortune. If you hurt her, if you use her, if you prove yourself less than what you claim, there is no hole deep enough to hide in. Do you understand?" "I do." No hesitation, no defensiveness. "And I give you my word, I will spend every day trying to deserve her, whether she chooses me or not." Something in Martha's expression softened. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of something that might become trust in time. "Leave us," she said to Rowan. "I want to speak with my daughter alone." He rose without argument, inclining his head once more before leaving the room. Thomas followed, casting one last suspicious glance over his shoulder. When they were alone, Martha reached for Lila's hand. "Tell me everything, not the facts. I can see those well enough. Tell me what your heart is saying." Lila sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. "I don't know what my heart is saying. It's been so long since I've asked it anything." "Then ask it now." She closed her eyes, trying to reach past the fear and the calculation and the desperate mathematics of survival. What did she want? Not what did her family need, not what made practical sense, but what did Lila Hart, the woman who dreamed of railroads and cities and choosing her own path, actually want? "I want to stop being afraid," she whispered. "I want to stop counting every penny, measuring every meal, wondering how much longer before everything falls apart. I want—" Her voice cracked. "I want to live, Mama, really live, not just survive." "And this man, this Rowan Winters, does he feel like living?" Lila opened her eyes, finding her mother's gaze waiting. "He feels like possibility, like a door I didn't know existed. But I don't know what's on the other side. No one ever does." Martha squeezed her hand. "When I left St. Louis to follow your father into the wilderness, everyone said I was mad, throwing away a comfortable life for some dreamer with dust on his boots." She smiled, her eyes distant with memory. "They were right that I was mad. What they didn't understand was that some kinds of madness are worth choosing." "Are you telling me to marry him?" "I'm telling you that love doesn't always arrive the way we expect. Sometimes it comes as a stranger at the door during a storm. Sometimes it comes disguised as something else entirely." Martha's grip tightened. "Whatever you decide, decide it freely. Your father would want that. I want that. The rest, the money, the debts, my illness, that's not your burden to carry. It never should have been." Tears burned in Lila's eyes. "How can I not carry it? You're my family." Family means sharing burdens, not drowning under them. Martha reached up to touch her daughter's face. "You've been so strong, Lila, so brave. But strength isn't about doing everything alone. Sometimes the bravest thing is accepting help when it's offered." They sat together as the afternoon light faded, mother and daughter, the weight of the future pressing down on them both. Outside, Lila could hear Thomas arguing with Rowan about something. Horses, probably, or the right way to stack firewood. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. But nothing felt safe anymore. Everything felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. By the time Lila emerged from her mother's room, the sun was setting and Rowan was preparing to leave. He'd spent the afternoon helping Thomas with chores, she learned, mending a section of fence that had collapsed under the snow, hauling water from the well, splitting wood for the fire. Physical labor that left his fine clothes dusty and his hands red from the cold. "You didn't have to do that," she said, finding him near the horses. "I wanted to." He pulled on his gloves, adjusting the saddle straps. "Your brother doesn't trust me. That's fair. I haven't earned trust yet. And you think hauling water will change his mind? I think showing up and doing the work is how trust begins." He swung up into the saddle, looking down at her with those steady, patient eyes. "I'll be at the boarding house for 3 more days. After that, I have business in Denver that can't wait. If you decide before then, send word. If not—" He paused. "If not, I'll respect your silence as an answer." She watched him ride away, his figure growing smaller against the darkening sky, until he disappeared over the ridge, and she was left alone with the impossible choice that had consumed her world. 3 days. 3 days to decide the rest of her life. The wind picked up, carrying the first flakes of new snow. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, lonely, searching, calling out into the vast empty dark. Lila pulled her coat tighter and went inside to wait. The first day passed in a haze of uncertainty. Lila went through the motions of daily life, feeding the chickens, tending to her mother, mending clothes that were more patched than original fabric, but her mind remained fixed on the impossible choice before her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the hidden valley, the mansion rising from the snow, Rowan's face as he offered her a future she'd never dared to imagine. Thomas watched her with wary eyes, saying little but communicating volumes through his silence. He'd been against the idea from the moment he'd learned of it, and nothing she could say seemed to shift his position. "He's buying you," Thomas said finally, on the evening of the second day. They sat together by the fire, their mother asleep in the back room, the wind howling outside like a living thing. "That's what this is, a purchase. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. He has money, we have debts, and you're the currency in between." Thomas's young face was hard, older than his years. "Papa would never have allowed this. Papa isn't here." The words came out sharper than Lila intended. "Papa is gone, Thomas, and we're the ones left to figure out how to survive. Do you think I want this? Do you think I dreamed of marrying some stranger just to keep us from starving? Then don't do it. We'll find another way." "What way? Tell me, because I've been looking for 8 months and I haven't found one." She felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. "Morrison's offer is still on the table. Is that what you'd prefer? Me married to a man who looks at me like I'm livestock?" Thomas flinched. "That's not fair." "Nothing about this is fair. Nothing has been fair since the rock slide took Papa." Lila stood, moving to the window, staring out at the darkness. "At least Rowan treats me like a person. At least he's giving me a choice." "Some choice. Marry him or lose everything." "He said I could refuse. He said the money he gave us is ours to keep either way." "And you believe him?" "Did she?" Lila pressed her forehead against the cold glass, searching for certainty in a world that offered none. She thought of Rowan's eyes, steady and patient. She thought of the way he'd spoken about her father, with genuine respect and grief. She thought of the hours he'd spent helping Thomas with chores, asking nothing in return. "I believe he's lonely," she said quietly. "I believe he's spent his whole life surrounded by people who want something from him, and he's desperate to find someone who doesn't. Whether that makes him trustworthy, I don't know, but I believe it makes him human." Thomas was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller, younger, the voice of a boy who'd lost his father and was terrified of losing his sister, too. "I don't want you to go." Lila turned from the window, her heart breaking at the fear in his face. She crossed the room and knelt beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. "I know, and I don't want to leave you, but Thomas—" She squeezed his fingers. "If I do this, you'll be provided for, you and Mama both. You can go to school, learn a trade, become whatever you want to be. That's worth something, isn't it? Not if it costs you your whole life. What if it doesn't? What if this is the beginning of something, not the end?" She tried to smile, though it felt fragile on her face. "Rowan isn't a monster. He might not be what I imagined for myself, but he's not cruel. And maybe in time—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't bring herself to speak of love or happiness or any of the things she'd given up hoping for. Thomas pulled his hands free and stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Do what you want. You will anyway." He disappeared into his room, the door closing firmly behind him. Lila remained kneeling on the cold floor, feeling the weight of his disappointment pressing down on her shoulders. Tomorrow was the third day. Tomorrow she would have to decide. The morning brought clarity she hadn't expected, not in the form of certainty, but in the form of Jacob Morrison standing on her front porch with a look of triumph on his weathered face. "Miss Hart." He tipped his hat, though the gesture held no real courtesy. "I came to see if you'd reconsidered my offer." Lila stood in the doorway, blocking his entry, her spine straight despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "My position hasn't changed, Mr. Morrison." "Hasn't it?" His smile revealed tobacco-stained teeth. "I heard some interesting things about you, Miss Hart. About you spending the night in that stranger's house. About you riding off into the mountains with a man you barely know." He leaned closer, and Lila caught the sour smell of whiskey on his breath. "People are talking. Your reputation isn't what it was. My reputation is my own concern." "Is it? Because in a town this small, reputation is everything. A woman with a ruined reputation doesn't have many options." His eyes traveled over her body with deliberate slowness. "I'm offering you one of the few options you have left." Anger flared in Lila's chest, hot and bright. I'd rather starve. Something ugly flickered across Morrison's face. That can be arranged. I'm calling in your family's debt, Miss Hart. The full amount due in 30 days. If you can't pay, he shrugged. Well, the law is the law. Your land, your cabin, everything you own becomes mine. The blood drained from Lila's face. You can't do that. I can. I've already filed the papers. He stepped back, satisfaction oozing from every pore. 30 days. Unless, of course, you'd like to reconsider my offer, Mrs. Morrison has a nice ring to it, don't you think? He walked away before she could respond, leaving Lila standing in the doorway with her world crumbling around her feet. 30 days. She had 30 days before Morrison took everything. She moved through the morning in a daze, her hands performing familiar tasks while her mind raced through impossible calculations. Even with the $50 Rowan had given them, they couldn't pay off Morrison's debt in 30 days. They'd need $400 at least, more than most families in Miller's Crossing saw in 2 years of hard work. There was only one person who could help her now, only one person with the resources to stop Morrison's plan. By midday, her decision was made. She found Rowan in the boarding house parlor, a book open in his lap, though his eyes had the distant look of a man whose thoughts were elsewhere. When she entered, he rose immediately, something like hope flickering across his features before he schooled his expression into careful neutrality. Lila. Just her name, nothing more, but she heard the question in it. I need to talk to you. In private. They walked together through the town, ignoring the curious stares and whispered comments that followed them. Lila led him to a small grove of aspens at the edge of Miller's Crossing, where bare branches rattled in the cold wind and snow drifted against the white trunks like scattered memories. Morrison came to see me this morning, she said without preamble. He's calling in our debt. 30 days to pay everything we owe, or he takes the land. Rowan's expression hardened. He can do that? Apparently he's already filed the papers. He wants to force my hand. Marry him or lose everything. That won't happen. I know, because I'm going to marry you instead. The words hung in the frozen air between them. Rowan stood very still, his eyes searching her face. I need you to understand something, Lila continued, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest. I'm not saying yes because I love you. I'm saying yes because Morrison has left me no other choice, because you're the only person who can stop him from destroying my family, because... She faltered, then forced herself to continue. Because of all my terrible options, you're the least terrible one. She expected anger or at least disappointment. Instead, Rowan nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he'd already known. I can work with that. Can you? Because I won't pretend to feel things I don't feel. I won't smile and simper and pretend to be a happy bride when we both know this is a transaction. I've never asked you to pretend anything. He moved closer, though he didn't touch her. I asked for honesty, and you're giving it to me. That's more than most people ever offer. This isn't what you wanted. What I wanted was a chance. You're giving me that. His voice softened. Lila, I know you're not choosing me. You're choosing survival. But maybe, if we're both honest with each other, if we both try, something real could grow from this. Not right away, maybe not for a long time. But the possibility is there. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that this desperate bargain could become something more than desperation. But hope was a luxury she'd learned to live without. When? She asked. The wedding? As soon as possible, I'd think, before Morrison can cause any more trouble. He paused, calculating. I can have a judge here by tomorrow afternoon. The ceremony itself would be simple, just the legal formalities, but it would be binding. Tomorrow. The word felt surreal in her mouth. Tomorrow she would be married. Tomorrow her entire life would change. Unless you need more time. What I need is for Morrison to lose. Tomorrow is fine. Something like a smile touched Rowan's face. You're remarkable, you know. Most women would be in tears right now. I've used up all my tears. There aren't any left. He reached out then, slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her cheek, a touch so gentle it barely registered, yet it sent a shiver down her spine. I'm going to make this right, he said quietly. I don't know how yet, but I promise you, Someday you'll look back on this moment and know that it was the beginning of something good, not the end of your dreams, the beginning of new ones. Lila wanted to believe him. Standing in the cold grove with his fingers warm against her skin, she almost did. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of activity. Rowan sent riders to Denver with messages for lawyers and judges. Lila returned home to face her family with the news that she would be married by sunset tomorrow. Her mother took it better than expected, or perhaps she simply understood, in the way mothers do, that some choices aren't really choices at all. She held Lila's hands and told her to be brave, to be honest, to remember that she deserved happiness, even if she didn't believe it yet. Thomas refused to speak to her at all. The ceremony took place in the boarding house parlor on a gray afternoon, with snow falling gently outside and a fire crackling in the hearth. The judge was a severe-looking man with kind eyes, and he performed the brief ritual with the efficiency of someone who'd married dozens of couples under similar circumstances. Lila wore her mother's wedding dress, altered hastily by Mrs. Patterson to fit her smaller frame. The ivory silk was yellowed with age, but still beautiful, and as Lila looked at herself in the mirror before the ceremony, she felt her mother's presence wrapping around her like a blessing. Rowan wore a dark suit that transformed him from dusty cowboy to distinguished gentleman. Watching him wait for her at the makeshift altar, Lila felt a strange flutter in her chest. Not love, not yet, but something that might someday grow into something like it. "Do you, Lila May Hart, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The judge's voice seemed to come from very far away. Lila looked at Rowan, at his steady eyes, his patient expression, his hands that had hauled water and mended fences for a family he barely knew. "I do." "And do you, Rowan James Winters, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you husband and wife." It was done. In less than 10 minutes, Lila Hart had become Lila Winters, and everything she'd ever known had changed forever. Rowan kissed her, a brief gentle press of lips against hers that was over almost before it began. But in that moment, Lila felt the reality of what she'd done settle into her bones. She was married to a man she barely knew, for better or worse, until death did them part. The celebration, such as it was, consisted of tea and cake in the boarding house parlor. Mrs. Clemens beamed as if she'd orchestrated the whole thing. The judge made polite conversation and departed as soon as propriety allowed. And through it all, Thomas sat in the corner, refusing to meet Lila's eyes. "Give him time," Rowan said quietly, following her gaze. "He's lost his father, and now he feels like he's losing his sister too. That's a lot for a boy to carry. He's not losing me. He doesn't know that yet." They left for the Hidden Valley the next morning, after Lila had said goodbye to her mother and made arrangements for Thomas to follow with their belongings in a few days. Morrison's debt had been paid in full. Rowan had sent a messenger the evening before with a bank draft that covered everything plus interest. The look on Morrison's face, she was told, had been worth the price of admission. But as the horses carried them higher into the mountains, away from everything she'd ever known, Lila felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her like a physical thing. She was married. She was leaving home. She was riding toward a life she couldn't imagine, with a man she didn't love, hoping that somehow, against all odds, things would work out. The mansion looked different this time, less like a dream, more like a reality she would have to learn to navigate. Mrs. Prescott met them at the door with the same cool efficiency as before, but this time her words carried different meaning. "Welcome home, Mrs. Winters." Mrs. Winters. The name felt like a costume she was trying on, ill-fitting and strange. But she straightened her spine and nodded, playing the part she'd agreed to play. "Thank you, Mrs. Prescott. Please have my things brought to my room." If the housekeeper was surprised by Lila's composure, she didn't show it. She simply nodded and withdrew, leaving Lila and Rowan alone in the grand entryway. "Your room has been prepared in the east wing," Rowan said, his voice carefully neutral. "Mine is in the west wing. As I promised, separate quarters until you decide otherwise." Relief and something she refused to identify as disappointment warred in Lila's chest. "Thank you. There's something else I should tell you." He paused, and for the first time since she'd met him, Rowan looked uncertain. "My aunt is arriving from Denver tomorrow. Martha Vale, she's my mother's sister and the only family I have left. She's also—" He hesitated. "She's not going to be pleased about this marriage." "Why not?" "Because she had other plans for me. Plans that involved marrying me to the daughter of a business associate, someone who would bring connections and alliances instead of—" He stopped himself, clearly uncomfortable. Instead of a penniless mountain girl with a dying mother and a mountain of debts. Lila's voice came out flat, but she felt the sting of the words in her chest. "I understand. She doesn't define me, Lila. Her opinions don't change anything." "Don't they? She's your family. Your only family," you said. "Her approval must matter to you." Rowan moved closer, his expression intent. "What matters to me is that I married the woman I chose. Not the woman my aunt chose. Not the woman society expected, but the woman who pointed a rifle at my chest and demanded I state my business. Martha can disapprove all she wants. It won't change anything." He sounded sincere. He looked sincere. But Lila had learned long ago that sincerity was easy to fake when the stakes were high enough. "I should rest," she said, stepping back. "It's been a long journey." If her retreat disappointed him, Rowan didn't show it. He simply nodded and gestured toward the stairs. "Mrs. Prescott will show you to your room. Dinner is at 7, if you're feeling up to it. If not, I can have something sent up." "I'll be there." She climbed the grand staircase alone, feeling Rowan's eyes on her back, until she turned the corner and disappeared from view. Her room was beautiful, larger than her family's entire cabin, with a 4-poster bed, a fireplace already burning, and windows that looked out over the snow-covered valley. Someone had placed fresh flowers on the dresser, an impossible luxury in the dead of winter, and the sheets smelled of lavender and something she couldn't name. Lila stood in the center of the room, surrounded by wealth she'd never imagined, and felt more alone than she had in her entire life. She was Mrs. Winters now, wife to one of the richest men in Colorado, mistress of a hidden valley and a mansion that belonged in a fairy tale, and she had no idea what came next. Dinner that evening was a quiet affair, just Lila and Rowan in the massive dining room with Mrs. Prescott hovering nearby and the fire crackling in the hearth. They talked about inconsequential things, the weather, the household routine, the books in the library that Lila was welcome to read whenever she pleased. But beneath the polite conversation, Lila felt the undercurrents of something more. The way Rowan's eyes lingered on her face when he thought she wasn't looking. The careful distance he maintained, as if he was afraid of spooking her. The weight of all the things they weren't saying pressing down on them both. "Tell me about your aunt," she said finally, breaking the pretense of casual conversation. "What should I expect?" Rowan set down his wine glass, his expression growing serious. "Martha Vale is a force of nature. She's been running the social side of the Winters empire since my mother died, organizing events, managing relationships, making sure the family maintains its position in Denver society. She's brilliant, ruthless, and she loves me in her own way. But she's also controlling. She has very specific ideas about what my life should look like, and she doesn't take kindly to surprises." He paused. "Our marriage is definitely a surprise." "You didn't tell her you were coming to Miller's Crossing? That you were looking for a wife?" "I told her I was handling business in the mountains. Nothing more." Lila absorbed this information, turning it over in her mind. "So tomorrow I'll meet a woman who had plans for you, who didn't know those plans were about to be ruined, and who will almost certainly blame me for everything. She might surprise you." "Do you believe that?" Rowan's silence was answer enough. They retired early that evening, Lila to her room in the east wing, Rowan to his in the west. The mansion felt enormous in the darkness, its hallways stretching on forever, its shadows hiding secrets she hadn't yet learned. Lila lay awake for hours, listening to the wind howl outside, wondering what tomorrow would bring. She was walking into a battle she hadn't known existed, facing an enemy she'd never met, fighting for a marriage she wasn't even sure she wanted. But she was a heart. Her father had taught her that hearts didn't run from fights. They faced them head on, with whatever weapons they had at hand. Tomorrow she would meet Martha Vale. And tomorrow she would show this formidable aunt that the penniless mountain girl was not as easy to dismiss as she might think. The storm came with the dawn, and with it came Martha Vale. She arrived in a carriage that shouldn't have been able to travel the mountain roads in such weather, pulled by horses that looked too fine for the work. The vehicle stopped before the mansion's front steps, And the woman who emerged was exactly as Lila had imagined, tall, severe, dressed in black silk that probably cost more than Lila's family had earned in a year. Martha's eyes swept over the mansion's entrance, found Lila standing on the porch, and narrowed with immediate displeasure. "So?" she said, her voice cutting through the howling wind. "You're the girl." "I'm Mrs. Winters," Lila replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Welcome to your nephew's home." Something flickered in Martha's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or grudging respect for Lila's composure. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by cold calculation. "We'll see about that." She swept past Lila into the mansion, trailing expensive perfume and barely concealed hostility. Lila followed, her heart hammering but her spine straight, knowing that the true battle had only just begun. Rowan met them in the entryway, his expression carefully neutral but his body tense with anticipation. "Aunt Martha, I wasn't expecting you until this afternoon." The roads were better than anticipated. Martha's eyes moved between Rowan and Lila, missing nothing. "I came as soon as I received your message. A marriage, Rowan, without consulting me? Without even a proper engagement period?" "It was a private matter." "Nothing about your life is private. You are the head of Winters Timber Company. Your choices affect everyone, the business, the family, our standing in society." Her gaze fixed on Lila with undisguised contempt. "And this is what you chose? A mountain girl with nothing to recommend her but a pretty face and a convenient set of circumstances?" "Careful, Aunt Martha." Rowan's voice carried a warning edge Lila hadn't heard before. "You're speaking about my wife." "I'm speaking about a mistake that can still be corrected." Martha turned to Lila, her smile sharp as a blade. "How much will it take, girl? How much money to make this marriage disappear?" The words hit Lila like a slap, but she refused to flinch. Instead, she stepped forward, meeting Martha's cold gaze with one of her own. "I'm not for sale, Mrs. Vale, and neither is my marriage." "Everyone is for sale. It's just a matter of finding the right price." "Then you haven't been looking hard enough. Some things aren't about money." Martha laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "How delightfully naive. You truly don't understand what you've married into, do you? The expectations, the obligations, the sharks waiting to tear you apart the moment you show weakness?" She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "This isn't some fairy tale, girl. This is war. And you are woefully outmatched." That remains to be seen. The two women stood face to face, neither willing to back down. The air between them crackled with tension, and Lila felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The knowledge that everything she said and did would be judged, evaluated, used against her. But she also felt something else. Something that had been dormant for months, buried under grief and exhaustion and the endless struggle to survive. She felt alive. "I think," Rowan said quietly, breaking the standoff, "that we should all sit down and discuss this like civilized people." Martha's eyes remained fixed on Lila for a long moment before she finally turned away. "Very well, but this conversation is far from over." She swept toward the parlor, her black silk rustling like whispered threats. Rowan caught Lila's arm as she moved to follow. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." She met his eyes, saw the concern there, and felt something warm flicker in her chest. "She's not the worst thing I've faced." "No, but she might be the most persistent." Despite everything, the hostility, the uncertainty, the impossible situation she'd found herself in, Lila almost smiled. "Then she'll learn that persistence runs in my family too." The parlor felt like a battlefield, though not a single weapon had been drawn. Martha Vale sat in the finest chair as if she owned the room, as if she owned everything within these walls and was merely tolerating the presence of interlopers. Rowan positioned himself between the two women, his body tense with the effort of maintaining neutrality. And Lila stood near the fireplace, refusing to sit, refusing to give Martha the satisfaction of looking down on her. "Let me be perfectly clear about the situation," Martha began, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "In 3 weeks, the annual Winters Timber Shareholders Meeting takes place in Denver. Every important businessman, politician, and social figure in Colorado will be there. They will expect to meet Rowan's new wife." Her eyes swept over Lila with unconcealed disdain. They will expect someone appropriate. And you don't believe I'm appropriate, Lila said flatly. I believe you're a disaster waiting to happen. You have no education in social graces, no understanding of business politics, no connections that could benefit this family. The moment you open your mouth in polite society, everyone will know exactly what you are. A mountain girl who married above her station. The words stung more than Lila wanted to admit. Not because they were cruel, but because part of her feared they were true. What did she know about shareholders' meetings and social functions? What did she know about the world Martha Vale inhabited? But she'd be damned if she'd let this woman see her doubt. Then I suppose I'll have to learn quickly, Lila said, keeping her voice steady. Unless you'd prefer to explain to those important businessmen why Rowan's wife wasn't present at his own company's event. Martha's eyes narrowed. You'd actually consider attending? I'm his wife. Where else would I be? For a moment, something flickered across Martha's face. Surprise, perhaps, or the first glimmer of reassessment. Then her expression hardened again. If you insist on subjecting yourself to scrutiny, then you'll need preparation, intensive preparation, starting immediately. Aunt Martha, Rowan began. No, Martha cut him off with a sharp gesture. If this girl is determined to play the part of your wife, she'll do it properly or not at all. I won't have the Winters name embarrassed because your bride doesn't know which fork to use or how to address a senator. Lila felt her spine stiffen at the dismissive tone, but she also recognized the opportunity buried within the insult. Martha was offering to teach her, grudgingly, hostilely, but still offering, and Lila had never been too proud to learn from someone who knew more than she did, even if that someone despised her. Fine, she said. Teach me. Both Rowan and Martha looked startled by her quick acceptance. Lila met their gazes evenly. You think I'm afraid of hard work? I've been keeping a homestead alive single-handed for 8 months. I've stretched meals to feed 3 people when there was barely enough for 1. I've bargained with creditors who wanted to take everything we had. She stepped closer to Martha, refusing to be intimidated. Learning which fork to use is the least difficult thing I've done this year. Martha studied her for a long moment, and Lila felt herself being measured, weighed, evaluated. Whatever the older woman saw, it seemed to shift something in her calculation. Very well, Martha said finally. We begin tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock sharp, and Mrs. Winters, the title dripped with skepticism. Don't expect me to go easy on you simply because my nephew has a soft spot for charity cases. She rose and swept from the room without waiting for a response, leaving Lila and Rowan alone in the crackling silence. You didn't have to do that, Rowan said quietly. You don't have to prove anything to her. Yes, I do. Lila turned to face him, exhaustion and determination warring in her chest. If I'm going to be your wife, if I'm going to live in this world, I need to know how to survive it. Your aunt may hate me, but she knows things I don't. I'd be a fool to refuse her help just because she's offering it with a knife in her hand. Rowan was silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then something softened in his eyes. You really are remarkable. I'm practical. There's a difference. No, he said, moving closer. There isn't. Not in this case. They stood together by the fire, closer than they'd been since the wedding, and Lila felt suddenly aware of him in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be before. The warmth of his body, the steadiness of his presence, the way he looked at her as if she were something precious rather than something purchased. I should rest, she said, stepping back. Tomorrow sounds like it's going to be exhausting. Lila. His voice stopped her at the doorway. Whatever happens in Denver, whatever my aunt says or the businessmen think, I'm proud to have you as my wife. I want you to know that. She didn't trust herself to respond. She simply nodded and escaped to her room where she could be alone with the confusion of feelings his words had stirred. The next 3 weeks were the most grueling of Lila's life. Martha Vale was relentless. Every morning at 6, Lila presented herself for lessons that stretched until well past dark. Table etiquette, conversation topics, the complex hierarchy of Denver society, how to address different ranks of importance, how to deflect personal questions without causing offense, how to smile even when someone was insulting you to your face. The smile is armor, Martha instructed. demonstrating an expression that looked warm but reached nowhere near her eyes. You'll hear things that make you want to scream or weep or slap someone across the face. You'll smile instead. You'll deflect with wit if you have any, with pleasant agreement if you don't. And you'll never, never let them see that they've wounded you. Why? Lila asked, after a particularly brutal session on the subtle art of social warfare. Why all this pretense? Why not simply be honest? Because honesty is a luxury, Mrs. Winters, one that women in our position cannot afford. Martha's voice carried an edge that might have been bitterness. Men can be direct. Men can say what they mean and mean what they say. Women must be strategic. We must influence without appearing to influence, lead without appearing to lead, and achieve our goals while letting others believe it was their idea all along. That sounds exhausting. It is. It's also how the world works. Martha paused, something almost like sympathy flickering in her expression. You're not stupid, girl. I'll give you that. You learn quickly and you don't make the same mistake twice. But learning and performing are different things. In Denver, you'll have one chance to make an impression, one chance to prove you belong at Rowan's side. If you fail... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Lila absorbed the lessons like a sponge, storing away every piece of information, every subtle technique, every warning about the enemies she would face. Martha taught her about the business rivals who would probe for weakness, the society matrons who would judge her clothes and manners, the fortune hunters who would test her marriage for cracks. There's a woman named Victoria Ashworth, Martha said one afternoon, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. She was the one I intended for Rowan. Her father owns controlling interests in 3 railroad companies, and a marriage would have been extremely advantageous for Winter's timber. And now she's going to meet the woman who took her place. She's going to try to destroy you, publicly, spectacularly, with maximum humiliation. Martha's eyes met Lila's. Victoria is beautiful, wealthy, and well-connected. She's also cruel in ways that don't show on the surface. Be very careful around her. Why are you telling me this? Martha was silent for a moment. Because as much as I dislike this marriage, I dislike losing more. If you're going to represent this family in Denver, you're going to do it properly, and that means knowing who your enemies are. It wasn't warmth exactly, but it was something closer to respect than Lila had expected to earn. In the evenings, Rowan would find her in the library, curled up with books on business and etiquette and Colorado history. Anything that might give her an edge in the battles to come. He'd sit across from her, pretending to read his own book while actually watching her, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You don't have to study every waking moment, he said one night. Martha's lessons are enough to drive anyone mad. I need to be ready. You need to rest too. You won't impress anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. Lila set down her book, meeting his eyes. Tell me about Victoria Ashworth. Something tightened in Rowan's expression. My aunt told you about her. She told me Victoria was supposed to be your wife. She told me Victoria is going to try to destroy me. Lila kept her voice steady, though the words twisted something in her chest. What she didn't tell me is why you rejected her. Why you came looking for a stranger in the mountains instead of marrying the woman everyone expected. Rowan was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was distant, remembering. Victoria Ashworth is everything society values. Beautiful, accomplished, sophisticated. She knows exactly how to charm a room and exactly how to wield power without appearing to do so. She would have been a perfect Winter's wife. He paused. She would also have been a perfect business arrangement, nothing more. You didn't love her. I didn't even like her. His laugh was bitter. Behind the charm, Victoria is empty, cold in ways that have nothing to do with temperature. She wanted the Winter's name and the Winter's fortune, and she didn't particularly care what came attached to them. Marrying her would have been like marrying a beautiful statue. But you considered it. I considered it because I was tired, because I'd spent years fighting off fortune hunters and social climbers, and at least Victoria was honest about what she wanted. There would have been no pretense, no disappointment when she discovered I couldn't give her love. He looked at Lila then, his eyes intense. Then I met your father, and he talked about his family like they were miracles. Like love was something real and possible, not just a fairy tale for children. And I thought, maybe I should keep looking. Maybe there's something more. The confession hung in the air between them, more intimate than any touch. Lila felt her carefully constructed walls tremble, felt something warm and dangerous trying to break through. "I'm not a miracle," she said quietly. "No, you're better. You're real." She should have looked away, should have deflected with wit, as Martha had taught her, or retreated to the safety of her room. Instead, she held his gaze, feeling the connection between them like a physical thing, fragile but present, growing stronger with each passing day. "We should sleep," she said finally. "Tomorrow will be another long day." "Lila." He caught her hand as she rose, his fingers warm against her skin. "Whatever happens in Denver, I'm glad you're the one beside me." She squeezed his hand once, briefly, before pulling away. "Ask me again after the shareholders' meeting. We'll see how glad you are then." But as she climbed the stairs to her room, she realized that somewhere in the past 3 weeks, something had shifted. The marriage that had begun as a desperate bargain was becoming something else, something she hadn't expected and wasn't sure she was ready for. Denver arrived faster than Lila was prepared for. The city rose from the plains like a proclamation of ambition, buildings reaching toward the sky, streets teeming with people, the air thick with smoke and possibility. Lila had never seen anything like it. Her entire world had been mountains and small towns, and now she was surrounded by more people than she'd seen in her entire life. The Winters mansion in Denver was, if possible, even more imposing than the Hidden Valley estate. 4 stories of red brick and white trim, with windows that seemed to go on forever, and a staff that snapped to attention the moment Rowan's carriage arrived. "Welcome home, Mr. Winters," the butler intoned. "Mrs. Winters." Lila straightened her spine and nodded graciously, exactly as Martha had taught her. Inside, her heart was racing. The shareholders' meeting was scheduled for the following evening, but the social gauntlet began immediately. Within an hour of their arrival, cards began appearing, invitations to teas, dinners, and private gatherings. Everyone wanted to meet Rowan's mysterious new bride. "They're circling," Martha said, sorting through the stack of cards with practiced efficiency. "Testing the waters. We'll accept 3 invitations before the meeting. Enough to show we're not hiding, not so many that you exhaust yourself before the main event." The first tea was a disaster. Not obviously, not in any way that showed on the surface, but Lila felt it. The subtle barbs disguised as compliments, the probing questions designed to expose her origins, the pitying glances exchanged between society matrons who thought she couldn't see. "How charming that you grew up in the mountains," one woman said, her smile sharp as a blade. "It must be so overwhelming, adjusting to civilized society." "Not at all," Lila replied, her own smile firmly in place. "The mountains taught me to recognize predators. It's a useful skill in any environment." The woman's eyes widened, unsure whether she'd been insulted. Around them, conversation faltered for just a moment before resuming its polished flow. Martha, watching from across the room, gave an almost imperceptible nod. The second event was better. Lila learned to deflect more gracefully, to turn questions back on the asker, to reveal nothing while appearing open and friendly. She watched how the other women moved and spoke, absorbing their techniques like a general studying enemy tactics. The third event was where she met Victoria Ashworth. She was beautiful, there was no denying that. Dark hair piled in elaborate curls, a gown that probably cost more than Lila's family had earned in 5 years, and eyes like chips of blue ice. She approached Lila with the confidence of someone who had never been refused anything in her life. "Mrs. Winters," Victoria's voice was honey poured over broken glass. "I've been so eager to meet the woman who captured Rowan's heart. The whole city is talking about you." "I'm sure they are." Such a romantic story. A lonely heiress swept off her feet by a handsome stranger, like something from a novel. Victoria moved closer, her perfume cloying. Of course, novels never tell you what happens after the wedding. The challenges of adjusting to a new station, the expectations that can crush someone unprepared. "I appreciate your concern. I'm simply being practical." Victoria's smile sharpened. "Rowan and I have known each other since childhood. I understand him in ways that take years to develop. If you ever need guidance, I'd be happy to help." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Victoria was staking her claim, warning Lila that this battle was far from over. "How kind of you," Lila said, matching Victoria's smile with one of her own. "But I found that understanding grows fastest through adversity, and I've had plenty of that." Something flickered in Victoria's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at finding resistance where she'd expected surrender. But she recovered quickly. "I'm sure you have. How resilient of you." She laughed, a delicate sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, I'm certain we'll be seeing much more of each other. Denver society is such a small world, after all." She drifted away, leaving Lila feeling like she'd just survived a skirmish in a much larger war. The night of the shareholders' meeting arrived with all the weight of a reckoning. Lila stood before the mirror in her room, barely recognizing the woman who stared back at her. The gown Martha had chosen was elegant without being ostentatious, deep green silk that brought out the color of her eyes, with a modest neckline and clean lines that spoke of quality rather than flash. Her hair had been styled by a professional, her face lightly powdered, her grandmother's ring, the one she'd sold and Rowan had secretly bought back, gleaming on her finger. "You look ready," Martha said from the doorway. It wasn't exactly a compliment, but it wasn't an insult either. "I don't feel ready." "That's normal. The day you feel ready is the day you've become complacent." Martha moved into the room, adjusting the fall of Lila's gown with practiced hands. "Remember, tonight isn't about winning them over. It's about surviving, about showing them you won't break under pressure." "And if I do break?" Martha's eyes met hers in the mirror. "You won't." It wasn't comfort exactly, but it was something close to faith. The shareholders' meeting took place in the grand ballroom of the Windsor Hotel, the most prestigious venue in Denver. Crystal chandeliers cast glittering light over hundreds of guests, businessmen in tailored suits, their wives in elaborate gowns, politicians and journalists, and everyone who was anyone in Colorado society. Lila descended the stairs on Rowan's arm, feeling every eye in the room turn toward her. The whispers began immediately, a susurrus of speculation and judgment that followed her across the marble floor. "Steady," Rowan murmured. "They're just people. People who want me to fail, then disappoint them." The first hour was a gauntlet of introductions. Lila shook hands and made small talk with dozens of important people whose names and faces blurred together. She smiled until her cheeks ached. She deflected personal questions with the skill Martha had drilled into her. And through it all, she felt the weight of scrutiny pressing down on her like a physical thing. Victoria Ashworth appeared at her elbow during a momentary lull. "You're doing surprisingly well," Victoria said, her voice carrying just far enough to be overheard by the nearby cluster of society matrons. "I suppose breeding shows, even when the pedigree is unconventional." "Thank you for noticing," Lila replied sweetly. "I understand you're quite the expert on pedigrees. All those generations of marrying for money must give one such perspective." Victoria's expression flickered, shock at being challenged so directly. But before she could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. A group of men had entered the ballroom, led by a portly figure with a red face and the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Lila recognized the type immediately, a man who wielded power like a weapon and expected everyone to cower before it. "Senator Morrison," someone nearby whispered, head of the Territorial Mining Committee. Morrison. The name hit Lila like a blow. Not Jacob Morrison from Miller's Crossing, but some relative perhaps. Someone with the same surname, the same air of entitlement, the same predatory gleam in his eyes. The senator made his way through the crowd, accepting greetings and congratulations, until he stopped directly in front of Lila. "So this is the mysterious Mrs. Winters," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "I've heard so much about you, my dear. How you appeared from nowhere and captured our Rowan's heart." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Tell me, how does a simple mountain girl adapt to all this grandeur?" The silence was suffocating. Every eye in the room was on Lila, waiting to see how she would respond to this deliberate humiliation. Lila felt something shift inside her, not the careful control Martha had taught her, but something older, something forged in mountain winters and desperate survival, and the knowledge that she had already faced worse than this pompous fool could ever imagine. "Quite easily, Senator," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silence. The mountains teach you to assess terrain quickly, to identify stable ground and avoid loose rock that might give way under pressure. She smiled, letting a hint of steel show through. Some skills transfer remarkably well to new environments. A ripple went through the crowd. Surprise, amusement, grudging respect. Morrison's face darkened. You have a sharp tongue, Mrs. Winters. I wonder if it matches your understanding of business. I wonder the same about you, Senator. The mining bill you proposed last month, for instance, did you calculate the water impact on the downstream communities, or was that detail beneath your notice? The silence that followed was absolute. Morrison's face went from red to purple. Around them, Lila could see businessmen exchanging startled glances, recalculating their assumptions about Rowan's mountain bride. I've read the territorial surveys, she continued, keeping her voice pleasant, conversational. The water tables in the proposed mining areas supply 3 communities, nearly 2,000 people. Your bill would allow unrestricted extraction without any provision for their needs. I'm curious how you plan to address that concern. Morrison sputtered, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged, especially by a woman. That's a matter for the committee to discuss. With all due respect, Senator, it's a matter for the people who lose their water to discuss, unless the committee believes their opinions don't matter. She felt Rowan's hand tighten on her arm, not in warning, but in something that felt like pride. Around them, the crowd had begun to murmur, the dynamics of the room shifting in ways Lila could feel but not quite define. Mrs. Winters makes an excellent point. A new voice cut through the tension, an older man with silver hair and keen eyes, wearing the subtle markers of extreme wealth. I've had similar concerns about that bill. Perhaps, Senator, we should revisit the environmental provisions before the next vote. Morrison's face twisted, but he forced a smile. Of course, Governor. Always happy to consider all perspectives. The governor. Lila had just gained the attention, and apparently the approval, of the most powerful man in Colorado Territory. Victoria Ashworth watched from across the room, her expression unreadable, but Lila could see the calculation behind those ice-blue eyes, the reassessment of an enemy who had just proven far more dangerous than expected. The evening continued, but something had fundamentally changed. Where before Lila had been a curiosity, Rowan's mysterious mountain bride, she was now something more. Someone who had stood toe-to-toe with a senator and emerged victorious. Someone who might actually belong in this glittering world. How did you know about the mining bill? Rowan asked during a quiet moment, genuine wonder in his voice. I read, Lila said simply, everything I could find in your library about Colorado politics. I figured if I was going to survive here, I should understand the terrain. He looked at her then, with an expression she'd never seen before. Not just pride or admiration, but something deeper. Something that made her breath catch and her heart race. You continue to astonish me. I'm just getting started. The night ended with something that felt almost like triumph. But as the carriage carried them back to the Winters mansion, Lila knew this was only the first battle. Victoria was still out there, still scheming. Morrison and his allies would be looking for revenge. And somewhere in the shadows, other enemies were surely waiting. But for the first time since she'd married Rowan Winters, Lila felt like she might actually win. Martha was waiting for them in the parlor, a glass of brandy in her hand and an expression on her face that Lila had never seen before. You publicly embarrassed a senator, Martha said. He publicly tried to humiliate me first. Yes, he did. Martha took a long sip of her brandy. And you handled it perfectly. The governor is already calling you a remarkable young woman. Half the businessmen in that room are now more interested in you than they are in Rowan. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried something almost like respect. I may have underestimated you, Mrs. Winters. Does this mean the lessons are over? The lessons are never over. But there was a hint of a smile on Martha's face. However, I believe the curriculum may need to be adjusted. You're not the student I thought you were. She rose and swept from the room, leaving Lila and Rowan alone in the firelit darkness. She's almost starting to like me, Lila said. She respects you. With my aunt, that's more important. Rowan moved closer, his eyes searching her face. How do you feel? Exhausted, terrified, exhilarated, alive. Like I just survived something, she said honestly. Like maybe I can survive what comes next. You can. We can. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Together. The word hung between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to address. But Lila felt its truth settling into her bones, the recognition that somewhere in the past weeks she had stopped fighting alone. Whatever battles lay ahead, she would face them with Rowan at her side. And that, she was beginning to realize, made all the difference. The victory at the shareholders' meeting should have brought peace. Instead, it brought war. 3 days after her triumph over Senator Morrison, Lila woke to find Rowan already dressed and pacing the parlor, a telegram crumpled in his fist and fury etched into every line of his face. What's happened? He handed her the telegram without speaking. The words blurred before her eyes, then sharpened into terrible clarity. Marriage validity challenge. Stop territorial. Judge. Questioning legality. Stop. Hearing scheduled Thursday. Stop. Board members requesting emergency meeting. Stop. Victoria, Lila said, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. Victoria, Senator Morrison, and half the board members who've been waiting for an excuse to take control of the company. Rowan's voice was tight with controlled rage. They're claiming our marriage wasn't properly witnessed, that the judge who performed the ceremony didn't have jurisdiction in that county, that the whole thing was a fraud designed to... He stopped, unable to finish. Designed to what? To steal the Winters' fortune, to manipulate a lonely heir into signing away his birthright. His laugh was bitter. They're painting you as a con artist, Lila, a scheming mountain girl who preyed on my weakness. The words hit her like physical blows, each one landing with precision in the places where she was most vulnerable. All her fears, all her doubts transformed into accusations that would be spoken aloud in a courtroom for everyone to hear. Can they do this? Can they actually invalidate our marriage? They can try. The territorial courts are complicated, and the judge who performed our ceremony was appointed under disputed circumstances. If they find the right angle, the right technicality, Rowan's jaw tightened. Yes, they might succeed. Lila sank into the nearest chair, her mind racing. Everything she'd fought for, everything she'd survived, it could all be undone by lawyers and paperwork and the machinations of people who saw her as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. When is the hearing? Thursday, 4 days from now. 4 days to save her marriage, her reputation, her entire future. 4 days to outmaneuver enemies who had been playing this game far longer than she had. Then we have 4 days to prepare. Rowan looked at her, something shifting in his expression. You're not giving up. I don't know how to give up. My father never taught me that particular skill. Despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the impossible odds, Rowan almost smiled. What do you need? Everything. Every document related to our marriage, every piece of information about the judge who performed the ceremony, every detail about the people who are challenging us. She stood, feeling the familiar fire of determination kindling in her chest. And I need to talk to your aunt. Martha Vale was, for once, not the enemy. She arrived within hours of receiving Lila's message, her face grim, but her eyes sharp with the light of someone preparing for battle. I warned you this would happen, she said, sweeping into the parlor. I told you this marriage would bring complications. You also trained me to handle complications. Are you going to help, or are you going to lecture? Something flickered in Martha's expression, surprise, perhaps, at being challenged so directly. But beneath it, Lila caught a glimpse of something else, something that looked almost like approval. Tell me what you need. They worked through the night, poring over documents and legal precedents, mapping the network of enemies arrayed against them. Victoria Ashworth's involvement was clear but difficult to prove. She'd been careful to keep her fingerprints off the official challenge. Senator Morrison was more direct, his name attached to several of the complaints filed with the territorial court. But the real threat came from an unexpected direction. The board of directors, Rowan said, spreading a series of letters across the table. 3 of them have signed documents supporting the challenge. They're using this as an excuse to question my leadership, to push for changes that would give them more control over company decisions. They want to take the company from you. They want to take everything from me. The company, the fortune, the valley, all of it. His voice carried an old weariness, the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting this battle for years. I've held them off until now through careful management and the support of loyal partners. But if our marriage is invalidated, it proves I'm vulnerable. It proves my judgment can be questioned. Then we don't let them invalidate it. Martha looked up from the legal documents she'd been studying. There may be a way. The challenge rests on the claim that Judge Wilson lacked proper jurisdiction. But I found records showing he was appointed by the territorial governor himself under emergency provisions during the mining crisis of '82. That should settle it. It would, except those records were conveniently lost from the official archives. Someone has been very thorough in covering their tracks. Martha's eyes narrowed. However, there's one place they might not have looked: the governor's personal files. Lila's heart rate quickened. The governor we met at the shareholders' meeting? The same. Governor Richardson keeps meticulous personal records of every appointment he's made. If the original documentation exists anywhere, it's in his study. Will he help us? He might. You impressed him at the meeting, challenged Morrison in ways no one else dared. The governor has his own reasons for wanting Morrison weakened. Martha paused. But he's a careful man. He won't stick his neck out without something in return. What does he want? That's what we need to find out. The meeting with Governor Richardson took place the following afternoon in the private study of his Denver residence. Lila had expected formality, the careful dance of political negotiation that Martha had trained her to navigate. Instead, she found a tired man sitting behind a desk covered in papers, looking at her with eyes that seemed to see everything. Mrs. Winters, I've been expecting you. You knew I would come. I knew someone would come. The challenge to your marriage isn't exactly a secret. Half of Denver society is buzzing about it. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. Sit. Tell me what you need. Lila sat, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Everything depended on this conversation: her marriage, Rowan's company, their entire future. The challenge rests on claims that Judge Wilson lacked jurisdiction. We believe you have records proving he was properly appointed under emergency provisions. I do. The governor's expression remained unreadable. Those records would end this challenge definitively. Then why haven't you produced them? Because politics isn't about what's true, Mrs. Winters. It's about what's useful. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with unsettling intensity. Senator Morrison has powerful friends. Victoria Ashworth's family controls significant railroad interests. The board members challenging your husband represent combined assets worth more than the territorial treasury. He paused. Why should I make enemies of all of them to help you? Lila felt the familiar cold of calculation settling over her. This was what Martha had trained her for, the moment when charm and politeness gave way to the raw arithmetic of power. Because Morrison's mining bill will cost you the next election, she said. The water rights issue isn't going away. Those 3 communities will vote against anyone who supported destroying their livelihood, and they'll convince their neighbors to do the same. Something shifted in the governor's expression. Go on. If you help us, we can help you. Winters Timber has influence in every mountain community in Colorado. Rowan's support could swing those votes back in your direction. She leaned forward, meeting his eyes. And more than that, we can offer you something Morrison never could: honest partnership. We're not looking to exploit the territory or drain its resources. We want to build something lasting, something that benefits everyone. Pretty words. How do I know you'll keep them? Because I grew up in one of those mountain communities. My family struggled and sacrificed and nearly lost everything because powerful men didn't care about the consequences of their decisions. Lila's voice carried the weight of all she'd survived. I know what it means to be forgotten, Governor. I won't forget others the way I was forgotten. The silence stretched between them, heavy with calculation and possibility. Lila could see the governor weighing her words, measuring them against his own interests, calculating the risks and rewards. Finally, he nodded slowly. The records will be delivered to the courthouse before the hearing. Judge Wilson's appointment will be verified, and the challenge to your marriage will fail. He stood, extending his hand. But I'll hold you to your promise, Mrs. Winters. Winters Timber will support fair water legislation. Your husband will testify before the mining committee about sustainable practices. And you, he paused, you'll be my voice in the communities that don't trust politicians. That's a lot to ask. It's the price of my help. Take it or leave it. Lila didn't hesitate. I'll take it. The hearing convened on Thursday morning in the largest courtroom Denver had to offer, packed with spectators eager to witness the downfall of Rowan Winters' mountain bride. Victoria Ashworth sat in the front row, her face composed into an expression of polite concern that didn't quite hide the triumph in her eyes. Senator Morrison occupied a position of prominence, surrounded by the board members who had thrown their weight behind the challenge. Lila entered on Rowan's arm, wearing a simple dress that spoke of dignity rather than ostentation. She could feel every eye in the room tracking her movement, could hear the whispered speculation rippling through the crowd. But she kept her spine straight and her expression calm, exactly as Martha had taught her. The judge, a stern-faced man named Harrison who owed no allegiance to either side, called the proceedings to order. We are here to examine the validity of the marriage between Rowan James Winters and Lila Mae Hart, solemnized on November 15, 1885. The petitioners claim that the officiating judge lacked proper jurisdiction to perform the ceremony. Is this correct? Morrison's lawyer rose, a thin man with cold eyes and a voice like ice. That is correct, Your Honor. Our research indicates that Judge Wilson was appointed under provisions that were never properly ratified. His authority to perform marriages in the affected county is therefore invalid, and any ceremonies he conducted must be considered null and void. The words sent a murmur through the courtroom. Lila felt Rowan's hand tighten on hers, his tension communicating through that single point of contact. The petitioners have documentation supporting this claim? Judge Harrison asked. We do, Your Honor. The official records show no legitimate appointment of Judge Wilson to the position he claimed to hold. Very well. Does the defense wish to respond? Rowan's lawyer, a solid man named Thompson, who had served the Winters family for decades, rose slowly. We do, Your Honor. We have evidence that directly contradicts the petitioner's claims. He produced a leather folder and approached the bench. Inside were the documents Governor Richardson had promised, the original appointment papers signed and sealed, proving beyond any doubt that Judge Wilson had been legitimately authorized to perform marriages in the relevant county. The effect was immediate. Victoria's composed expression cracked, revealing the fury beneath. Morrison's face went purple with rage. The board members exchanged panicked glances, their carefully constructed challenge crumbling before their eyes. Where did these documents come from? Morrison's lawyer demanded. The official records show no such appointment. These are the governor's personal copies, Thompson replied calmly. It appears the official records were incomplete. Judge Harrison examined the documents, his expression growing stonier with each page. When he looked up, his eyes swept the courtroom with undisguised contempt. These documents are authentic. They bear the official seal and the governor's signature. Judge Wilson was properly appointed, and his authority to perform marriages was legitimate. He turned to the petitioner's table. This challenge is dismissed. The marriage between Rowan Winters and Lila Hart is valid and binding. The courtroom erupted. Voices rose in shock, anger, celebration, but Lila barely heard any of it. She was watching Victoria Ashworth's face transform from confident triumph to devastating defeat. Watching the realization dawn that all her scheming had come to nothing. But Victoria wasn't finished. She rose from her seat, her voice cutting through the chaos. This proves nothing. Even if the marriage is technically valid, it's still a fraud. This woman manipulated a lonely man into marriage, exploited his grief over his parents, preyed on his desire for connection. Her eyes locked on Lila, blazing with hatred. She's nothing but a common fortune hunter who got lucky. The courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned to Lila, waiting to see how she would respond to this final desperate attack. Lila rose slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle onto her shoulders. Everything she had learned, everything she had survived, had brought her to this point, not just to defend her marriage, but to claim her place in this world once and for all. Mrs. Ashworth raises an interesting point, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. What kind of woman marries a man she barely knows? What kind of fortune hunter accepts a proposal from a stranger who appears at her door during a storm? She paused, letting the questions hang in the air. The answer is a desperate one. A woman watching her mother die slowly because she can't afford medicine. A woman facing creditors who would take everything her father spent his life building. A woman with no options and no hope. Victoria's expression flickered, uncertainty beginning to replace triumph. Yes, I married Rowan Winters for his money. I've never pretended otherwise. I married him because it was the only way to save my family, and I would do it again without hesitation. Lila's voice strengthened. But here's what you don't understand, Mrs. Ashworth. Here's what none of you understand. She turned, addressing not just Victoria, but the entire courtroom, the spectators, the board members, the journalists scribbling in their notebooks. I came to this marriage with nothing but desperation. I stayed because I found something I never expected. Her eyes found Rowan, sitting at the defense table, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I found a man who treated me like an equal, not a possession, who gave me choices when everyone else was trying to take them away, who stood beside me even when standing beside me cost him everything. She turned back to Victoria. You wanted him because he was rich. I want him because he's good, and that's a difference you'll never understand. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria's face had gone pale, her carefully constructed composure shattered. Around her, the tide of public opinion was visibly shifting. Sympathy for the mountain girl who had spoken truth to power, contempt for the society beauty who had tried to destroy her. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. Is there any further business before this court? No one spoke. Then these proceedings are concluded. The marriage stands. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell like a thunderclap, and the battle was over. In the chaos that followed, the congratulations, the questions from journalists, the defeated retreat of their enemies, Lila found a quiet moment with Rowan in the hallway outside the courtroom. You didn't have to do that, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You didn't have to defend me in front of everyone. I wasn't defending you. I was telling the truth. Lila. He caught her hands, his eyes searching her face. What you said in there, about staying because you found something you didn't expect, did you mean it? She thought about all the walls she had built, all the careful distance she had maintained. She thought about the fear that had driven her into this marriage and the unexpected transformation that had followed. I meant every word. Something broke open in Rowan's expression, relief, hope, something that looked almost like joy. He pulled her close, right there in the public hallway where anyone could see, and kissed her. It wasn't like the brief, formal kiss at their wedding. This was real, passionate and tender and full of promise. Lila felt her remaining defenses crumble, felt herself opening to possibilities she had never allowed herself to imagine. When they finally separated, breathless and slightly stunned, she found herself laughing. People are staring. Let them stare. Rowan's smile was brighter than she had ever seen it. I want the whole world to know that I love my wife. The word stopped her breath. Love? I've loved you since you pointed that rifle at my chest and demanded I state my business. I've loved you through every argument, every lesson, every impossible challenge you've conquered. I just didn't know how to tell you. He touched her face, gentle as snowfall. I love you, Lila. Not because you're useful or appropriate or what society expects, because you're you. She felt tears burning behind her eyes, not tears of grief or exhaustion, but something else entirely. Something that felt like the breaking of a long winter, the first warmth of spring after months of cold. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have for longer than I wanted to admit. They stood there in the hallway, two people who had found each other through impossible circumstances, holding onto a truth that felt stronger than all the forces that had tried to tear them apart. Around them, the world continued its turning. But in that moment, nothing else mattered. The weeks that followed brought changes Lila had never anticipated. The legal victory was just the beginning. With the marriage challenge defeated and Morrison's allies scattered, Rowan's position at the head of Winter's Timber was stronger than ever. But it was Lila who became the unexpected catalyst for transformation. True to the promise she had made to Governor Richardson, she threw herself into the work of building bridges between the company and the communities it affected. She traveled to logging camps and mill towns, listening to workers' concerns, documenting conditions that needed improvement. She met with families whose water supplies were threatened by mining operations, connecting them with lawyers and resources they'd never been able to access. "You're changing everything," Rowan said one evening, as they sat together in the library of their valley home. Thomas had finally arrived with their belongings, grudgingly accepting the situation after seeing how happy his sister had become. Their mother's health continued to improve, and she was expected to make the journey to the valley in spring. "I'm just doing what needed to be done, what should have been done years ago. The board members who opposed us are calling it radical, dangerous." He smiled. "They're also terrified of you." "Good. Maybe they'll think twice before trying to exploit people who can't fight back." She had established a school in the valley, the first of what she planned to be many, providing education for the children of workers who had never had access to such opportunities. She had implemented fair timber practices that balanced profit with sustainability, ensuring that the forests they harvested would regenerate rather than disappear. She had created a fund to support families affected by illness or injury, so no one would have to face what her own family had faced. "You're building an empire," Martha observed one afternoon, watching Lila work through a stack of proposals and plans. The older woman's hostility had transformed into something almost like partnership, though she still refused to acknowledge it directly. "I'm building a legacy," Lila corrected, "something worth leaving behind." Martha was quiet for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. "Your father would be proud." The words hit Lila with unexpected force. She thought about Samuel Hart, about his quiet dignity and his love for his family and his belief that honest work was its own reward. She thought about everything he had taught her, everything she had become because of his example. "I hope so," she said softly. "I hope so every day." Spring arrived with the force of resurrection, melting the snow from the valley and flooding the world with new life. Lila stood at the window of the mansion, watching the transformation with wonder. She had never seen the valley in any season but winter, and its beauty took her breath away. "There's something I want to show you," Rowan said, appearing at her side. "Something I've been saving." He led her outside through the grounds she had come to know so well to a small rise at the edge of the property. There, surrounded by aspens just beginning to leaf, stood a simple wooden bench facing the valley below. "I built this the week after we married," Rowan said. "Before I knew if you would stay. I wanted a place where we could sit and watch the world together. If you ever decided this was really your home." Lila sank onto the bench, overwhelmed by the gesture, by the hope it represented. Rowan sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and together they watched the valley come alive with spring. "I have something to tell you," she said finally. "What?" She took his hand, pressing it to her stomach. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was filled with everything: shock, joy, terror, hope. Rowan's face went through a dozen expressions before settling on wonder. "A baby. Your heir or heiress." She smiled, feeling tears spilling down her cheeks. "I found out last week, but I wanted to wait until spring to tell you. It seemed right somehow." He pulled her close, holding her like she was something precious, something miraculous. "I love you," he said into her hair. "I love you more than I knew it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too, both of you." They sat together on the bench Samuel Hart had inspired and Rowan Winters had built, watching the valley bloom beneath them, feeling the future unfurl like new leaves in the warming sun. Months later, when summer had ripened into autumn and the aspens had turned to gold, Lila gave birth to a daughter. They named her Rose. For beauty, for resilience, for the way hope blooms even in the hardest soil. Martha wept at the christening, though she denied it afterward. Thomas, now studying engineering at the territorial college Rowan had helped him enter, held his niece with the careful awkwardness of a young man encountering something fragile. And Lila's mother, fully recovered and radiant with joy, declared that Rose had her grandfather's eyes. "She has everything," Lila said, watching her daughter sleep in the nursery they had prepared together. "Every advantage we never had, every opportunity we never dreamed of." "We'll teach her to deserve them," Rowan replied. "To use them wisely, to remember where she came from." Where she came from is a frozen cabin in the mountains, with a mother who was desperate and a father who was grieving. Where she came from is a love story. Rowan wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder as they watched their daughter dream. The best kind, the kind that started with honesty instead of pretense. Lila leaned back into his embrace, feeling the solid warmth of him, the reality of everything they had built together. Outside the window, the valley stretched toward distant peaks, vast and beautiful and full of promise. She had come to this place as a desperate woman, trading her freedom for her family's survival. She had expected nothing more than a comfortable prison, a gilded cage where she would spend her days missing the life she'd left behind. Instead, she had found purpose, partnership, love. She had found home. The cowboy who once rode alone and the woman once forced to sacrifice had discovered something greater than wealth or power or the world's approval. They had discovered each other, and in that discovery they had built an empire of trust, a legacy of love, a future that stretched forward like the light of a new dawn breaking over the mountains. Victoria Ashworth eventually married a railroad baron and moved to California, where she could nurse her bitterness far from the winter's influence. Senator Morrison lost his re-election campaign and retired to obscurity. The board members who had challenged the marriage either made peace with the new order or were gradually replaced by people who shared Rowan and Lila's vision. And the Hidden Valley, which had once been just one man's refuge from a world of greed and false loyalty, became something more. It became a beacon, proof that wealth could be wielded with wisdom, that power could be used for good, that even the most desperate beginnings could lead to the most beautiful endings. On quiet evenings, when Rose was asleep and the house was peaceful, Lila would sometimes walk to the bench on the rise and sit alone, watching the stars emerge over the valley. She would think about her father, about the dreams she'd once had of railroad tickets and city lights, about all the paths she might have taken if a quiet cowboy hadn't appeared at her door on a frozen winter night. She wouldn't trade any of it. Not the fear, not the struggle, not the moments when everything seemed lost, because all of it had led her here, to this place, to this life, to a love that had survived truth, power, and the world's sharpest tests. And when Rowan found her there, as he always did, she would take his hand and lean against his shoulder and feel the rightness of everything they had become. "What are you thinking about?" he would ask. "The storm," she would answer. "The night you came to my door. Do you ever regret opening it?" She would turn to face him then, this man who had offered her a choice when the world offered only chains, who had loved her before she knew how to love him back, who had given her everything she never knew she needed. "Never," she would say, "not for a single moment." And in the silence of the valley, surrounded by the empire they had built together, she knew it was true. She knew it would always be true. The storm had brought him to her door, but love, real love, earned and tested and unbreakable, had kept them both standing. Forever. The end.